This week, Zach Wasserman, CTO and co-founder of Fleet, joins us to discuss open source endpoint security with OSquery and Fleet. Then, the triumphant return of Sven Morgenroth, security researcher for Invicti, will be giving a technical segment on hacking GraphQL. In the security news, following the ransomware money, the mystery snail, school cybersecurity is the law. Sue anyone, just not security researchers, hacking a flight school, refusing bug bounties in favor of disclosure, Apple still treats researchers like dog poo, prosecuting people for reading HTML, giving up on security, and a high school prank that never wants to give you up and won't let you down. All that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly.
Cybersecurity is about more than just technology. It's about how people behave with emails, data, and cloud applications that directly impacts your company's security posture. Security works best when it's ingrained in the culture of your organization. To learn how to build a security culture and transform your employees from targets into a strong line of defense, head to securityweekly.com/proofpoint and visit their Cybersecurity Awareness Center.
Hey, and welcome to the show. But first, let me introduce you to a man who doesn't like when ghosts come to his house for trick-or-treating. Why? They smell like sheet. Mr. Paul Asadorian!
Welcome everyone to Paul's Security Weekly. It's episode number 714, recorded on October 14th, 2021, right here in G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island. Mr. Larry Pesce is to my left. Larry, welcome.
How's it going?
You approved of my soldering.
I did, yeah.
Incapabilities. I guess you could call them.
Let's put it this way: with some practice, it'll be amazing.
Right.
You're pretty good.
That's just what it is with soldering, right? You just got to do it.
It's all practice. It's all practice, and having a little bit of the technique is like if you had somebody to show you how to do it.
Right. I had YouTube. That's what I ended up with.
If you had me to show you how to do it,
we'll have to schedule a soldering because I have lots of little other kits. That need to be put together. So maybe next time. That'll be greatly appreciated.
Let's do it.
Mr.
it on
Tyler,
the show.
Yeah, we'll do it live.
Hey.
Josh Marpet's here with us. Josh, welcome.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No.
But I mean, that was just, like, can you imagine the two of you, with Larry gently holding your shoulder so that you can solder properly in the proper form?
Proper form.
It'd be like Ghost.
Except cooler. Let's be clear.
Yep.
Much, much cooler.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was a request from the listeners to have live on the air us fixing our Drobo NAS, which is what this soldering project was. So,
man, we should have Twitch streamed that. Isn't that what all
I think we'll find some other stuff to Twitch stream that involves soldering, and Larry can give me a lesson live on the air. That'd be awesome.
Oh yeah.
Mr. Tyler Robinson is here with us. Tyler, welcome.
Buenos noches. It's not always ideal to solder at 800 degrees, but you got it done. You heated it up hot enough to
Well, that
stuff
was,
something.
I didn't have all the right tools, so when I was desoldering, I had to really crank the heat because I didn't have Larry described for me all of the proper tools that sounded way easier than the way I was doing. All I had was a soldering iron, so, got it to work. Lord. Mr. Lee Neely is here with us. Lee, welcome.
Good to be here, but like my buddy who's addicted to collecting vintage Beatles albums, I need help.
There's a new Beatles documentary coming out. Did you guys? Intern Dylan was just telling me about that. Yeah.
Is it really?
Yeah. He said there's something like 57 hours from a Let It Be recording that they found that kind of led to the documentary. Sounds interesting. I like documentaries. Let's see. We know we have some a quick announcement. Security Weekly Unlocked will be held in person this December 5th through the 7th at the Hilton Lake Buena Vista. Keynotes from Melissa Miller, John Strand, Leslie Carhart, and Dave Kennedy, as well as many other fabulous presenters. You can visit securityweekly.com/unlock to register and check out the Rockstar lineup. Joining us for this segment is Zach Wasserman, the CTO and co-founder of Fleet. Zach joins us to walk us through using OSquery and Fleet to enable observation, collection, and investigation on endpoints. Zach, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Paul. It's good to be here.
Nice to have you here, Zach. How did I'm curious, how did you get your start in information security? Or is that your background, or like what got you started in a field of technology, or maybe not? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I got started. I was studying computer science in university, and I met a grad student who'd got involved with the research of Matt Blaze, who you may have heard of. He's done some interesting work on election machine integrity and stuff. And they said, why don't you come join us? We're going to break the radios that the FBI is switching to. So I ended up getting to work with those folks, building some software and looking into the protocols that the feds are all using now. And we recorded some conversations that probably weren't supposed to be in the clear, but were. And I got a taste of learning how to, evaluate systems, break them, and see where the boundaries are.
Wait. Zach, how do I not know you? Have we met? Seriously, like I was there when Matt and Mouse were working on the PR25 stuff. And
the Project 25 paper, why Johnny still can't encrypt. So I was like their undergrad research assistant.
Oh, no shit.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Okay, so I was at the lab with them. I mean, not like all the time. I visited a couple times with Bill and Mouse and Matt and everybody. And I don't remember meeting. I might have met you. I apologize.
We may have met at the time. It's damn near 10 years ago now, and I'm a bit older. I would have been just a child then.
And was Q? Andrew Q. Ryder involved in that too?
Yes.
Yeah.
Q was there.
Yep.
Yeah. Travis Goodspeed, Sandy Clark, Perry Metzger.
Yep.
I mean, if I had to secure radio communications, that's a lineup I would want to have on my team for sure.
Yeah.
So, Zach, did you work for Facebook? Is that?
I did. Yeah. So then, the next thing that happened was I graduated from university. I started working at Facebook and ended up on the security team there, which was like the opportunity to kind of marry my interests of the security side of things with the getting to the massive scale, which I mean at the time was like hundreds of thousands of devices that Facebook was managing, and now it has grown into millions and millions of servers sitting in those data centers. So I was at Facebook in 2014 when Mike Arpaia joined, and he had the vision for OSquery. And basically, Mike started building it and tapped me to do some of the reviews of the earliest code and design documents. And, the story goes from there pretty much.
That's amazing. And so when you were first working on OSquery, was it a closed sourced project?
The intention was the whole time that we were going to open source OSquery. So, I mean, folks who've worked on open source software before, and especially open sourcing software that didn't start with that intention, know that there's like a lot of work to get something to a level of maturity and understandability for like the general public to consume.
Right.
Luckily, we had the buy-in from the management at that time, and Mike had the vision that this had to be a tool that everyone could use. So we built it from the ground up with the intent that it'd be open source. I think it took about 6 months to get to the first open source release, but that had been the plan all along.
It's amazing. What was the benefit to Facebook to basically fund this open source project?
Yeah, I mean, I think that especially at the time, Facebook was really buying into that hacker culture of open source and saw it as a great way to help improve the security posture of folks all throughout the industry and to help recruit for their security team and build up their reputation. And I think, most of all, we as individuals believe that everyone would benefit the most from the tool being open, and that Facebook as well would benefit from the stability, from the testing, from users out there in the wild and their contributions and their ideas.
I'm curious, Zach, what was it like working at Facebook? Did you? This is probably at a time before pre-pandemic, right? When you would go into the office.
Yeah, this is about 2014, 2015. So I was relatively freshly out of university, and it was kind of like the university campus. There's like a free candy shop folks would come visit and be like, okay, let's go get some ice cream, and I can show you the arcade. It gives people a funny view of what they think you do for work. The reality is, no matter where you are in the tech industry, you're almost always just sitting in front of that computer all day. But it was certainly an interesting environment to do that.
Yeah, that's interesting. And so were you at Facebook so how did Facebook, they open sourced it? Did they kind of divest the development of it? How does the story continue to unfold?
Yeah, for sure. So Facebook really invested really heavily in OSquery over those first years after we, envisioned it and released it. At first, it was targeting only Mac and Linux platforms, which is really based on that we'd identified this need where Windows was covered pretty well by some of the existing commercial endpoint security tools, and Mac had almost nothing, and Linux similarly almost nothing. So we got it out initially with the Mac and Linux support. Facebook brought on Trail of Bits, a consulting firm that folks might be familiar with, to add that initial Windows support somewhere around year 2 or 3 of the project. And Facebook really invested heavily in it for a long time. Folks like Ted Reed at Facebook just did some amazing work with OSquery that I think really helped bring it to a lot more organizations. And then I think it was around 2019 that Facebook handed the project over to the Linux Foundation. So it's been a kind of independently run project under the umbrella of the Linux Foundation since 2019, and now it's kind of governed by a board of folks who are at places like Facebook, Google, myself, and Trail of Bits.
Zach, it'd be remiss to not mention the elephant in the room, where Facebook gets some bad press, and certainly privacy is a thing, and I think a lot of people feel like Facebook does not treat people's privacy the way they should. Did it seem weird to you that they were doing this awesome thing for the community, but then there's Cambridge Analytica and all this other stuff going on, which was unfolding around the time that you were there and making this transition, working on OSquery, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting point to bring up, and all I can really say is that the folks that I worked with on the security team at Facebook really believed in the idea of building trust through securing the systems and trying to ensure that any access to any computer systems are authorized. I mean, certainly, I think we've all learned a lot about Facebook and what the influence of Facebook has been on the world since then. And it's been a while since I've been involved with anything, even close to being on the inside of Facebook.
Do you have a Facebook account today?
I do have a Facebook account. Okay. I don't log on to it much, but the account's there.
You just got 40,000 friend requests.
Right.
Yeah.
Wait, how'd you know?
Some of them might be duplicates.
So wait, now at what point, Zach, did you decide to leave and co-found a company based on this open source project that was, funded by Facebook?
Yeah, so essentially what happened was I kind of transitioned all of the work that I was doing at Facebook to head towards OSquery. I just saw the traction that it was gaining. I'd always believed in the open source vision of bringing software to everyone. And as I transitioned towards OSquery, I also kind of was getting a little bit more disillusioned with Facebook, the company, and working in an office like that. And so I ended up leaving and I started consulting. I worked on some early OSquery features for Airbnb that helped them get to their initial OSquery deployment. This is something like 2015, maybe 2016 at that point. And I stayed in touch with Mike Arpaia, who was, like I said, the original visionary for all of this work. And Mike and I got to talking and let's see what we can do to start a company to bring this technology to more folks beyond these kind of early adopters and places where people have like security engineers and software engineers who can get together and build the systems that put everything together in the way that takes you not just from raw capabilities, but to the insights that ultimately everyone's looking for, things that they can take action on. So Mike and I got together with Jason Miller. We founded Collide, which is where we built Collide Fleet, which we open sourced, and that became the nexus for Fleet. Collide ultimately kind of pivoted to some other things that were a little bit less OSquery focused, and I still had that attachment to the open source and the community that was growing around OSquery and growing around Fleet. So I went back to consulting, did that for another couple of years until, come about a year ago, I was approached by Sid C. Brandy, who is actually kind of an auspicious day to mention him. He's the CEO of GitLab. They just went public today.
Oh, that's right.
But yeah, so an exciting day for Sid and that team. Sid kind of pioneered this open core business model, this all remote teams idea. Like you can really build a multi-billion-dollar company that makes a huge impact doing these things. And Sid said, I love this work that you're doing with OSquery and with Fleet. Why don't we try to build a company around it? So that's about exactly a year ago where we went, we're going to really invest further into building up a team and a product and a vision around what's the traction that we built with Fleet as kind of the de facto way to deploy OSquery on a full open source stack.
I see. So Collide is still kind of doing their thing, but you're also doing your thing, and you can do that because it's all open source.
Yeah, I mean, that's the amazing thing about open source, right? Like you can move from organization to organization, and these licenses are designed such that, the MIT license is like such an amazing thing, in my opinion. Like anyone can take this software and build whatever they want with it. And that means that we can all benefit from the innovations of others, and we can all, pursue the commercial endeavors that we're interested in.
Now, were you involved with like helping to go get funding for the company that you work for today?
Yeah, so we actually, we had the great privilege, at least at the start, of getting the funding directly from Sid. Like I was mentioning, he believes in this business model, and so that's what got our foothold into being able to build out a team and stuff.
Yeah, because I can imagine some semi-uncomfortable conversations with potential investors. Be like, so the software is completely free, but we want money to build a company around the software that is out there for free, right?
Yeah, and I mean, it's something that people were really skeptical about. And like I said, today it's such an interesting day to have this discussion because we're seeing GitLab, which is this open core, part of it is truly open source under the MIT license, and part of it is licensed under like their commercial license. And they just IPO'd today at billions of dollars. And I think that it's a testament to the fact that we can both lift up everyone by providing the access to that open core, and we can enable folks to build whatever they want on top of that. And then that also folks and businesses are interested in getting those premium features on top of that and getting the support and just, philosophically supporting the development of this kind of software.
Yeah, I mean, preaching to the choir, I love the freedom that open source gives you, right? That's why I use Linux. It's not because of some religious thing or whatever. I like the freedom to be able to do what I want with my software and my devices. I don't want to be locked into an ecosystem or some piece of software because I have to pay the company for it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also an important part of a pitch for a small company like mine. I mean, we're going to become a pretty critical part of the infrastructure at some fairly large organizations. And the fact that this software is open source means they can audit it themselves and build trust. It means that, we're not going to disappear in the next couple of years. But if we did, they would still have the opportunity to take that code and develop it however they wanted to. So, no one's going to be left in the lurch in this kind of situation.
Do you think that a lot of companies are doing the due diligence and auditing a lot of these open source projects that they're bringing into larger corporations? Or do you think once a project gets to a certain maturity point and the community kind of rallies around it, that the inherent trust kind of takes over?
It's definitely a combination of both. I certainly speak to CISOs and managers in security teams who are saying, like, as part of our procurement process, we're going to do a pen test against Fleet, or we've evaluated the threat model of OSquery. And I mean, I think that OSquery itself at this point, like, it's well known publicly that it's deployed on millions of endpoints across some of the biggest organizations, publicly, like Facebook obviously is using it, but also Google and Apple, and it's just some of these huge organizations are using it. So it sees a lot of scrutiny. And I think that, the combination of those two things means that folks can get to a position of feeling more comfortable than they might be able to feel with, kind of black box closed source software.
And I tell you what, I think one of the reasons why it's so popular with large organizations and they're deploying it to all these systems is because it's kind of addicting. Like, once you get it on one system, you're like, I want this on all my systems. Like, go start it. And that's exactly how it happened here at Security Weekly. I started putting it in a test lab. Then I started putting it in our secondary studio that's more serving as a backup today. And I was like, this is really cool. I'm like, guys, we need to install this on everything, right? It started making its way to be installed on everything because it's so useful.
So,
for sure.
Zach, I've got to ask you this. Sorry. I mean, software bill of materials, the question you got asked by Tyler, right? Do you support software bill of materials and that whole movement?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's a really cool direction that kind of the open source industry, the open source community is pursuing with software. I think it's something that, we have not achieved high levels of purity with the software bill of materials and the reproducible builds and that kind of thing yet with OSquery, and not yet with Fleet, but we've taken steps in those directions. And I think it is going to be really important, especially as we're dealing with the organizations that are the most paranoid about their security, that we can say, everything's open, it's all verifiable, and you can get the artifacts that prove the way that things were built, and you don't have to bootstrap your trust on, like, me, Zach Wasserman. You can bootstrap it on, like, my team verified that this is good, or we verified, based on the signatures of other organizations that we trust, that we're deploying software that's, like, up to the standards that we want to run in our organization.
Zach, could you take us through kind of a high-level architecture? I'm curious, and I haven't done the due diligence to figure out what makes up Fleet and OSquery. Obviously the individual agents, for lack of a better term, running on the systems are going to be operating system dependent, but Fleet also has its architecture. Like, under the hood, like what are the technologies and how are they strung together?
Yeah, totally. So, I mean, starting with OSquery, which is, of course, the agent. So it runs on the endpoints, Mac, Linux, Windows. It's all the same code base across each of those. And I think the really interesting idea that is at the heart of OSquery is that it's built directly on SQLite. So it uses the SQLite query planning engine and execution engine to run these queries that you feed it. And you use that SQLite syntax to write queries and access all of these different APIs, hundreds of them. Like, if you go to osquery.io/schema, you can see all of the various tables that are available. But all these APIs become unified under that interface. And that really enables the analyst or the operator to write queries that come to mind without having to ship new software. Now, OSquery is the agent piece, and it handles things like actually executing the queries, pulling in configurations, running those queries at intervals, generating diffs in the logs so you can look at, like, how things are changing over time, and then also shipping those logs off to various destinations, including doing all of these things in communication with a centralized management server. And so that's where Fleet comes in. It becomes this central server for managing OSquery. And with Fleet, you are able to do things like, let me query across all of my 70,000 endpoints that I have connected to Fleet for some indicator of compromise I just became aware of, or who has this application installed because we found out there's a vulnerability in that, or who is using vulnerable kind of configurations. But Fleet doesn't just do that. It also helps to coordinate like the rollout and the management of OSquery at this kind of scale down from, tens of hosts up to hundreds of thousands. But what Fleet does is it stores like some metadata about all of the enrolled hosts in, if you're asking about infrastructure. So, it's a MySQL database and a Redis database that the Fleet server talks to. And then OSquery checks into Fleet and essentially says, what configuration do you want me to run in terms of the schedule of queries? Where do you want me to put the logs that I generate? And do you have any work that you want me to do right now? Fleet's able to coordinate all of that. And then Fleet becomes a single pane of glass, if you will, for managing those configurations and for getting the logs into places you need it and for generating insights on top of it. So like an interesting thing that we just added is the ability to collect a software inventory off of any of these endpoints and then to match that up with the vulnerabilities from the National Vulnerability Database.
Wow, that was my feature request for you, Zach, and you read my mind and implemented it already.
That is amazing.
Paul, you just gotta install Fleet, and I'm telling you, get it up and running in just a few minutes, and that's a free and open source feature in Fleet. So
now is that an add-on, Zach, that I have to install? Because I forget what you call them now. There's like add-on packages. Is that what you call them? That you can, once you get the Fleet up and running, there's a screen where you can add stuff, right?
Yeah. So that's it's not an add-on per se. You have to configure it a small amount within Fleet, but that's built right into the Fleet server. So if you've got OSquery deployed, it's a matter of changing a couple of flags to get OSquery talking to Fleet. And once you do that, you can kind of do everything from Fleet, like configure all the other queries that you want to run or start turning on these kind of useful features.
Gotcha. Yeah, I did it as part of my Security Onion deployment. So.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. Yeah, and the folks at Security Onion have done an awesome job of kind of packing up Fleet along with a bunch of other really cool open source security tools. And so that's a great way to get started for sure.
Yeah, I'm really digging it. And so, like, to get the vulnerability thing, I need to update or need to install an add-on?
Yeah, so I'm just trying to think off the top of my head. I don't know which version of Fleet Security Onion is shipping, so you may need to update Fleet. If they're shipping a recent enough version, then there's basically just some configs to run. And
gotcha.
We've got docs on fleetdev.com/docs that you can take a look at for enabling it.
I can bug Doug Burks and be like, hey,
for sure.
Get this in here.
Sam tells us that Doug's coming on the show.
He is. I'll actually be speaking to Doug prior to the show and on the show. So
nice.
Yeah, this is all very timely.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that open source is kind of ascendant in the realm of security as people are getting kind of disillusioned with the typical vendor products, and people want to do things where they understand what's going on in the hood, they can integrate more deeply, and they can build trust, again, like on the supply chain kind of things that folks were mentioning. So Security Onion is like a cool example of bringing in all those tools.
So, like, disclaimer, I'm on several Linux Foundation projects. I'm starting a working group under the SPDX project, which just got its ISO certification. Yay! And I'm a big fan of open source. Okay, so but I couldn't agree with you more. I think that people are realizing that open source software allows the integration to be better. Really, closed source software is only really used significantly these days by large enterprise companies with massive legacy deployments, or just the need for, we just want it to cookie cutter it and use it right now and be done with it. Otherwise, how many startups are building on open source cores? If they weren't, Black Duck and other companies like Black Duck and open source tracking companies wouldn't be around, and SBOMs wouldn't be popular. Okay, and that's a good and a bad. I mean, OpenSSL, Heartbleed, yes, I know. But I think, Zach, I'm sorry for rambling on, but I think you're 100% right.
Yeah, and to that point, I think that open source also still has a gap to fill where it's not necessarily as easy to get started with open source because folks haven't invested the time. Usually like your organization gets open source deployed and then you move on from that step. That's something that's like a gap that we really want to try to bridge with Fleet, is let's not just reach the organizations that have highly technical teams who are ready to deploy the software and know what to look for, but let's bring convention over configuration into the picture and always make sure that those highly sophisticated teams can still get at what's under the hood to do anything that their imagination could dream of, which I think is one of the exciting things of working with software that's completely open like that.
Zach, it strikes me that OSquery and Fleet give you this platform where you can ask any question and it will give you an answer. Very similar to actually a commercial, very large commercial company, that accomplishes the same thing. We get all this in open source, which is awesome. But I think in both cases, it begs the question, regardless, if you could ask any question of a system, it's almost overwhelming. Like, wait, what do I want to ask it? Do you have recommendations for like some use cases if people are especially just starting out with OSquery and Fleet?
Yeah, totally. And I mean, I think that there's a bit of like hierarchy of needs here, where we've got some of the more foundational use cases that people are trying to achieve, like what assets do I have in my organization? What OS versions are they running, and how do we need to prioritize getting those updates in? And that's, of course, information that OSquery can return. You still have to get it deployed, so that's a problem that OSquery doesn't solve. But once you get OSquery deployed, you can find out where do we need to get updates. You can start to address things like who's responsible for these machines and looking at the metadata about the cloud providers that they're living in, and you can get the software inventory and start addressing the vulnerabilities that you're discovering. And then I think another interesting thing that comes into play is if you look at the idea of compliance frameworks, I think someone was mentioning compliance earlier, like there's some good ideas there. There's a lot of pain that folks have to go through to get to compliance, but I think there's at the core of it, there's some good ideas of like, let's come up with the best practices that should be applied on our endpoints, and let's try to make sure that they're applied. So, Fleet is also kind of stepping in and introducing the idea of policies, so you can turn asking a question of OSquery into tracking your organizational compliance with your policy, if you will, and that becomes a way for us as Fleet to reach out to our customers and our open source users and say, these are the kind of policies that we recommend that you run, sometimes down to just very basic security hygiene, and sometimes up to, more sophisticated custom use cases that are going to matter on, only individual organization levels. I think that, again, this is where open source shines, because you can understand, if you're an engineer at an organization, you can understand really what capabilities are there, and you can augment the capabilities by shipping your own OSquery extension, or just by going to GitHub and contributing to OSquery directly to get these use cases met that you're looking to achieve.
Yeah, it's a great point, Zach. It's one thing to understand or know what questions to ask. It's another thing to know if an answer is bad or good. So there's some interpretation involved as well.
Yeah, for sure. And some of these things are going to be very clear cut, like is, the disk encryption enabled on an employee workstation? Like we can give an accurate yes or no answer to that, and it's clear which way we want that to be configured. But as a security analyst, we might be looking at like, okay, here's a process that's making a connection to an external IP address. I don't really know what's at this IP address, and I don't really know what this process does. Like maybe this is just this employee is getting their job done, or maybe there's something malicious going on. And so there will be challenges in understanding the right ways to ask the questions, and then of course the ways to interpret the answers, like you said.
Is there a monitoring aspect? Like let's say I wanted to monitor CPU utilization. Because that's a question I would have to ask over and over again, or like, how does that work?
Yeah, so the way that the monitoring works with OSquery and that would be enabled by Fleet is this scheduled query idea, where you essentially tell OSquery, like, I want you to run a specific query, like, tell me all of the processes that are running on the system and how much memory they're using. Mm-hmm. And I want you to run it every 5 minutes, 10 minutes, hour, once a day, whatever the interval that you want. And then those logs get easily shipped through OSquery and through Fleet into your Splunk or your Elastic or your S3 and Panther, as we're looking at the kind of solutions that folks are moving to. So there is a wide variety of monitoring use cases, both from, you're asking about like CPU and memory, that kind of thing, maybe more from an ops perspective, but also monitoring that folks want to do from the more sort of technical security perspective. Like, I want to audit all the socket connections that my servers are making and all the processes that execute on those servers, and do file integrity monitoring kind of use cases. So OSquery enables all of those, and you ship the one agent, and then all of a sudden, like, teams throughout your organization can start getting the insights that they need.
Yeah, it's interesting how querying a system and or monitoring, how much that overlaps with security, because maybe CPU monitoring on its own isn't security related, but when correlated with other events, like there's a new process running that we've never seen before, plus the CPU is spiking, plus there's a lot of disk activity, could be an indication of ransomware, for example.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that something that's still a challenge at a number of organizations is like, they just don't have access to the ground truth of what's going on these machines that they manage. And we're talking large and sophisticated organizations. And so I think that this is just a problem of scale. Like, when you become a large organization, you have dozens of teams managing endpoints, tens and hundreds of thousands and even millions of endpoints, and getting to the ground truth of what's going on there is a challenge. And OSquery can be a really effective tool for helping to at least ask the questions. And then again, that's where we're hoping with Fleet to introduce the conventions and more fully integrate these use cases, like asset management and vulnerability management and compliance and that kind of thing.
There are other companies, I know of at least one, that use the technology and are really focused on the security use case. It sounds like something you'd probably support, Zach, right? Like, the more people that use the software and benefit, that's a good thing in your mind?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I'm speaking as, from two roles in some sense. I sit on the OSquery Technical Steering Committee, and as a co-creator of OSquery, I just want to see OSquery succeed and get deployed out to more organizations. And I want to see the future of this kind of monitoring be open source, because of what it means for trust and what it means for the people who ultimately use these devices and who are served by the services that run on these servers. So there are a number of organizations, commercial organizations, that are integrating with OSquery. I think it's really cool, actually, to see that and to see how much these big organizations are adopting OSquery, not only for their internal security, but also as part of their product suites.
Sorry, I was trying to think of the name of the company that I was familiar with.
Can I
and make sure
Can I ask something,
right.
Paul?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I just was talking to a friend of mine, Kat Valentine, actually. She's one of the hosts on Security and Compliance Weekly.
I was going to say, that's lies. You don't have friends.
I have a couple, Larry.
Sorry.
Hey, I count you as a friend, even in the Mankini, so let's not go there, okay?
All right.
Anyway, so I was talking to Kat Valentine. She was one of the first employees at Vanta, and they're an automated compliance and a SOC 2 compliance, and they do a few others. She was telling me that every single automated compliance company that does an agent-based solution to collect information uses OSquery. And so your compliance piece from Fleet, which is obviously based on OSquery, like a lot of people are doing that. Do you feel that you're, and I'm going to ask an uncomfortable question, do you feel you're behind the 8 ball on that, or because you're focused on the devices, not necessarily the servers, that you're fine with it?
Yeah, that's it's a great question, and it's so interesting that you mentioned Vanta. We actually got together with Vanta and did a little like lunch and learn talk about OSquery recently. If anyone listening is interested, we posted a video online. So like I said, I really endorse everyone using OSquery for all of these commercial purposes. I think Fleet is not focusing on compliance. In particular, the named compliance frameworks as like our central thing right now. We're really focused on device management and getting like authoritative and timely answers to questions that you have about your devices. And I'm hopeful that, again, like the core of Fleet is MIT open source. I'm hopeful that we'll see organizations like Vanta who layer like a really cool layer of both human and technical measures to achieve these compliance frameworks. Will like use Fleet with OSquery as a way to get the data they need to do those jobs. So I wish them the best, and I think there's other organizations like SecureFrame that are using OSquery as part of their
Zach,
automated compliance solutions.
I wanted to make sure we mentioned Upticks. Ganesh Pai is the awesome person. They've been on the show in the past, and they're doing some really cool things with OSquery. My question is, and I'm not exactly sure how the MIT license works, quite honestly, because there's so many open source licenses, right? But I guess it's twofold. In the MIT license, if they make modifications, do they have to share them back? The second part is, if commercial companies are doing stuff with OSquery and or Fleet, are they sharing that back with you as well?
Yeah. So the MIT license is really one of those, it's like free as in freedom, but it doesn't have the virality of the GPL license. Mm-hmm. So folks are free to, fork an MIT project and do whatever they want with it. They can contribute the code changes back or not. And OSquery, actually, I believe it's the Apache 2 license, which is very similar. Mm-hmm. And so we've seen, like from Upticks, for example, we've seen some really cool and interesting contributions over the years. And at the same time, like Upticks multiple years ago, I think forked OSquery, and now they kind of have their own like closed source version of OSquery, and that's okay. We embrace anything that they do choose to contribute, and at the same time, I think that there's some challenges that come from trying to maintain some parity with like a fast moving open source project when you've got your own fork and your own changes that you have to layer on top of it.
Zach, you must sleep really well at night, because I love your positive attitude, and you're just embracing that it's out there and people can do whatever they want with it, and you must go to sleep at night and sleep so soundly. I love it. It's a great lesson, because I think many of us will create something and worry about people stealing it, but you don't have those concerns. I think it's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, seeing folks like, be happier at work and achieve their jobs and make money with these things and grow the community and the success of all that. Like, I'm just happy to see it.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Because when you think about the polar opposite, right? When we look back into history and early versions of Unix and Microsoft, it's a contentious environment. It's very ugly. Right? This is such a very positive thing for everyone that I wanted to underscore that it doesn't always go down like that, but this is really good to see and a great example.
Yeah, for sure. And I'd say, to anyone listening who likes the sound of that, like OSquery's got a super welcoming community. You can join us in the OSquery Slack. Like if you just Google OSquery Slack, there's an open invite. People are super helpful, enthusiastic about OSquery. Like I and my team hang out in the Fleet channel in OSquery Slack, and there's a lot of potential use cases. The community would love to chat, embrace new members, and embrace kind of folks using it for whatever purposes they like.
Some open source projects, Zach, suffer from this syndrome, I guess I'd call it, where you put all this work in, create this software, you give it away for free, and rather than getting contributions back, you just get not even pull requests, you just get tickets that are like, hey, can you add this feature? Hey, can you do this?
Oh, yes.
What's it like in OSquery and more specifically Fleet in that sense? Do you get a lot of contributions back from the community?
Yeah, I would say in both projects we do get a lot, and then both of these projects have this reality where the user of the software tends to be fairly technical, but they tend not to be software engineers. Usually it's someone with a title like security engineer or security analyst or client platform engineer on the more IT kind of side of the house. So we get an interesting mix of folks who are like, oh, I have an idea, like, here's the pull request, I'm ready with the code, like, let's talk about it and get it merged. And folks who are like, here's my idea, but I don't know how to build this. Like, OSquery is written in C++. It ain't easy.
Right, certainly.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure, but that's awesome that the folks that have the ideas are sharing it with you and, trying to contribute back in their own way. I think that's important as well. And, when you mentioned the Slack channel too, I think a lot of us might be hesitant to share our ideas and or ask a question because we don't want to seem stupid, right? And I got to imagine your community is not like that at all. Like it's probably very open and very welcoming. If someone asks what would seem like be labeled as a stupid question, it's not in your Slack channel, I would imagine.
Yeah. I mean, we definitely try to promote like good vibes, man. But really, it's like people come with questions sometimes that indicate they don't really understand how the project works, and we try to point them to the resources that they need to understand what it does and point them to the right parts of the manual. And we're not necessarily going to handhold you through everything, especially if it's well documented already, but we'll treat you with respect for sure.
There's a polite way to say RTFM, right? I get it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I had this rule, and it's interesting. I appeared on the Social Engineering podcast with Chris Hadnaghi, and we were talking about my past and jobs and how the different approaches to learning. And one of them was like at one of my jobs, you had to go research something for at least 30 minutes and try and figure it out on your own. Then when you go to ask someone who's more senior than you a question, their first question back to you was kind of implied like, what did you do to figure it out on your own? And if you show that you were putting some effort in, then they would help you, right? And that's a thing. I mean, there's a lot of complexity to OSquery and Fleet and a lot of these things we implement too, but you got to put your work in first.
I buy that entirely. And I think that putting that kind of work in before asking a question helps us learn things and build up a foundation of knowledge that is a really worthwhile investment. So that's the kind of thing that we encourage with our team internally at Fleet with our engineers. Like, you have a question about something, maybe your first instinct shouldn't be to ask. Maybe your first instinct should be think about it a little bit, look, see what you can learn, and then ask. Don't spend your whole day trying to figure out what's going on. But remember that those minutes that you spend thinking and spinning your wheels on this are a good investment.
Absolutely. No, it's a great way to think of it. More questions for Zach?
I got to play with awesome. That's what it is.
You definitely do. Yeah. And like I said, I mean, it really is addicting when you get started with it. You just want to deploy it everywhere. Oh, and that was my other question too, was do you plan to support IoT-based devices? Many of them are Linux-based, but I certainly understand the challenges of creating, software for IoT devices, but it would be super handy to have some of this telemetry from those devices.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's some really interesting emerging use cases. And for example, we just saw some cool work from the community adding support for building OSquery for ARM. I think it was primarily motivated by like the new AWS Graviton or Gravitron instances, but like OSquery is building and running on ARM64. I think that getting to new platforms is probably going to be something that we'll see over the coming time, and addressing, emerging things like more ephemeral infrastructure, containers, like getting into things like eBPF and all of that. Like there's a ton of interesting directions to take this, and the model of applying SQL as the abstraction to these things has been really successful. So definitely excited to kind of help work with the community on envisioning and then bringing to life these new use cases.
So I had one follow-up, and that was, are any of those use cases you're looking at, things you've been asked about, just too grandiose, they'd be awesome, cool, but you can't figure out how you could ever pull it off?
The biggest thing that comes to mind for me is like iOS. Like people want some instrumentation on iOS. Sorry, what was that?
I said that would be cool.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is though, like the APIs that are available are pretty limited by design. So it's like thinking about what we're gonna do there. Like, are we gonna is OSquery gonna jailbreak the device to get to the information that we want? Like, it's probably not the best idea, but like there's some interesting challenges there. Like, how do we operate in environments where the information is intentionally constrained and yet the threats are real?
I like that iOS is more of a challenge than BPF. BPF is very complex, but at least it's open. Right? There's an answer somewhere.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I'm not going to claim that I know how to do BPF programming, but like Alessandro Gario over at Trail of Bits has been doing some really awesome work with eBPF and OSquery, and
that's cool.
Now you can get process and socket events through eBPF and OSquery.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. Zach, I just have 5 questions for you. They're 5 silly questions that we ask of all of our new guests here on Security Weekly. So you're ready to play 5 questions with Security Weekly?
Let's do it.
3 words to describe yourself.
Like a zebra.
If you were to write a book about yourself, what would the title be?
Just chill.
If you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
Towel.
What is your favorite hacker movie?
Oh man, I don't watch that many movies. It's like, am I a bad hacker for not even having one?
No, certainly not.
No, honestly, you're probably a better hacker for not watching movies, let's be honest.
So we'll take that as your homework. War games, sneakers, hackers. Some of those.
Swordfish.
Yeah, someone throw me a recommendation here.
The Matrix.
The Matrix. The net.
Oh yeah,
net, but not the net.
I've seen the Matrix. I love that one.
There you go.
Score.
Squid Game.
Zach, choose.
Not a hacker movie.
Choose 2 celebrities to be your parents.
Alive, dead, fictional, or otherwise.
Thanks, Lee. I was waiting for you to do it.
Oh, wow. That's an interesting one. Let's say, oh man, I'm just, the pop culture things really throw me off here.
Doesn't have to be pop culture. I mean, like 1920s authors and book characters are completely valid.
Completely valid.
Oh yeah. So how about Tom Robbins actually as an author? I think just such a Sweet. Wild and creative imagination that seems pretty interesting. And then let's say Trey Anastasio, guitar player from Phish. Not sure if anyone likes
nice.
that.
Yeah, no, I'm actually a big Phish fan.
Didn't trip you up at all.
There you go. Outstanding. Zach, thank you so much for appearing on Paul's Security Weekly.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, Paul, and everyone.
Thanks, Zach.
Coming up next, Sven Morgenroth from Netsparker will come on and talk about GraphQL and hacking it. Stay tuned. Every 11 seconds, there's a new ransomware attack. Oil pipelines, universities, corporations, all paying millions of dollars. Barracuda says, don't pay the ransom. Before a ransomware attack occurs, train your teams to recognize an attack and use anti-phishing technology. Protect your applications, and they can't get onto your network. Simple backup and restore solutions quickly recover your data without paying the ransom. Build your ransomware protection plan now by visiting securityweekly.com/Barracuda. That's securityweekly.com/Barracuda. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Join us in our next live webcast on October 21st to learn why zero-knowledge encryption matters with the fine folks from Keeper Security. Visit securityweekly.com/webcast to save your seat. Don't forget to check out our library of on-demand webcasts and technical trainings at securityweekly.com/on-demand. This segment is sponsored by Invicti. To learn more, please visit securityweekly.com/Invicti, where you can find our fine friends at Acunetics and Netsparker. Joining us for this segment is Sven Morgenroth. Sven is a security researcher for Invicti and joins us today to talk about GraphQL APIs and their security. Sven, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me again. It's always nice to be here.
Yes, nice to have you, and nice. I like the topic. I like GraphQL. Every time I look at it, I'm like, wait, we need to be using this in our applications. This is pretty cool, actually. Although after this segment, I might change my mind.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty cool technology, actually. Like, it was developed by Facebook. I will go into detail a little bit more later about it. But yeah, I mean, I'm a fan of it. It is like a little bit tricky security-wise. You will see why in a minute. But yeah, in general, I don't advise you to not use it. I just would advise you to be careful about it, if anything, and read the documentation and like be aware of like the general pitfalls that you might encounter if you are using it. If it's okay, I will share my screen now so we can have a look at the presentation I prepared for this.
Sure.
Right. Can you see everything? Okay, perfect. So let's start with a little bit of general knowledge about GraphQL. So what is GraphQL? GraphQL is a language for querying and manipulating data through APIs. And back in 2015, it was publicly released by Facebook to be used. But internally, they were using it before then, in as early as 2012. For their iOS mobile app, they were using it for their news feed. And since then, like about every programming language that you can use to write web applications in is capable of like running GraphQL APIs. That includes JavaScript, Python, PHP, Ruby, Java, Go, and like many other languages. And yeah, the cool thing is it uses a standardized language, and usually you can transmit it via JSON post or via GET requests, though that is not the only thing you can do. You can also use WebSockets, for example. Like I think the Apollo framework supports this. And yeah, it's generally very versatile. There are a lot of add-ons for it, like you can have, for example, file uploads and stuff like this, all on top of the base GraphQL specification. So what are the advantages? Like one of the most important and most useful advantages is that you can fetch all the data you need with a single API call. It allows you to selectively query data and lets you choose the fields that are required for your specific use case. For example, you can imagine some endpoint that would return user data like the email address or like the username and stuff like this. And depending on where you need the data in the application, you can just send a API call to that specific endpoint, and then
now Sven,
get
when you're describing this, you have to use the student and the teacher in the school analogy, because that's the standard. I asked my nephew who just started at college, and he's like, I'm learning Java and object-oriented. And I'm like, let me guess, you're starting off with a student object. He's like, yeah, how did you know that?
Yeah, I mean, within this slide, these slides, I will use like authors and posts and stuff like this. But it's a similar concept. So yeah, I mean, it's the most easy thing to get the point across, I guess. But yeah, we will look into that in a little bit more detail later. But yeah, it's very useful to just have one endpoint, and then from your front end you have similar multiple different places where you can query data from it, and you only get the data you actually want and not any overhead with it. And that is just saving bandwidth just by avoiding redundant requests and too much data that is sent from the API to your front end. And that was also one of the initial reasons for its development, because I think back in 2012, they were having some issues with like all the data that you would need to query from the API in order to get it into the app, and it would produce a lot of overhead. And you had this very like interconnected these interconnected topics and authors and stuff like this, and it wasn't like the best thing to use with a REST API. So the people at Facebook probably developed it for reasons that had to do with this. Another advantage is that it is very easy to integrate microservices into your API. So if you have some other legacy API that you want to use with GraphQL, you can even do that. You can query backend services from your handler function. That is basically where your application logic resides. And yeah, the other useful thing is that it ships with validation and type checking. This is done using schemas. And yeah, that's also a very, very useful feature that I personally try to use in my REST APIs as well. But it is, it's like shipped out of the box in GraphQL for like GraphQL APIs, and that's a pretty cool thing. So you may ask yourself what GraphQL schemas actually are. So basically, they are describing the layout of your GraphQL API. They are written in the GraphQL schema definition language, or short SDL. And it lets you define fields that hold your data, basically. There are integers, there are floats, strings, booleans. And for all of these, the type checking is enabled out of the box. However, there are also custom scalars that you can use and define yourself, which don't have the type checking enabled, because you're like free to do with them whatever you please. And that's like the first pitfall you need to be aware of, because if you like expecting some custom scalar, like date is a popular example for this, or like just a date, then you might run into issues, because it doesn't prevent you from sending anything other than a date. You might also send like a string or something like this. And it's generally something you need to be aware of. It also supports arrays, objects, and GraphQL specific types, like ID is one example for this. Like the name suggests that it could probably be a numeric identifier, but you're free to use whatever you want. It's basically the same as a string. Like the ID type is just like telling you to be careful that it should it could contain some identifiers and must not be readable for human, but it is basically a string value, even if that's a little bit confusing. Right. You can also define whether fields can be empty or not, which is useful because you spare yourself a lot of boilerplate code if you have it right in the definition of your schema. And yeah, so the cool thing what schemas actually force you to do is write accurate documentation for your API. Because like the documentation is basically what your API consists of. And the added benefit of type checking, of course. So if you're done writing your schema, you basically have your documentation right in front of you with all the types that are expected to be passed and what the API is returning. And usually you don't have that with REST APIs, at least not like in that convenient way. So additionally, you can define arguments, and that's where things get interesting, I guess, from a security point of view, but also like from the usability, because this is where users will pass input to your API. So arguments also have their type specified in the schema. And if the type of your input is not the expected one, the API will return an error message, which is pretty useful and may avoid some bugs that are due to unforeseen like types, especially some NoSQL injections or SQL injections, maybe even. If you're expecting some type some input always to be an integer, but nobody really checks whether it is. So some developers might just put it into their SQL query without any further sanitization or like without using prepared statements, and then that's where things get ugly. So you can also define GraphQL queries and mutations. Queries allow you to read data. Mutations allow you to create, update, or delete it. And if you're familiar with like the best practices in REST APIs, that you maybe should use GET requests only for reading data, then you are probably also familiar with the fact that nobody like really does this, or like a lot of people don't, at least. And some state changing stuff may even happen with like queries, even though you probably expect it to only be done in mutations. All right, so application level code, is handled in so-called resolver functions, which I talked about a little bit earlier. That is where the data is aggregated and then returned to the user. So let's look at GraphQL schemas, and I took all the examples from the Apollo documentation. Apollo is basically a GraphQL library that is like very good, in my opinion. They have all the extra features that you maybe are missing from the vanilla GraphQL specification, and they also like wrote some own standards. I think the file upload functionality I mentioned before was also like introduced by Apollo, if I remember correctly. They have pretty good documentation about stuff, and also some extra features. So here you can basically see a very, very basic GraphQL schema, which has two types: a book type with like a title field and an author field. And the author field is also a type which is like the author field contains some data from the type author that you can see here below, which also has a name, which is a string, and books, which is an array of like the book type that you've seen before. So you already see that they are somewhat connected and reference each other. And that is a pretty cool feature, but it also leads to issues that we can see later. So how do you actually query data from like a database with that definition? So you send your query like this. You have a get books and authors query. You want only the title from the books, and you also want to have the like the respective author, and only want the name of them. So yeah, it may look like this if you're getting back the data. It will show you the title, only the title, not anything else, and only the name of the author. Even though, like internally, you could use a lot of other like fields apart from that. There's also the mutation type that I mentioned before. In this example, you can add a book with the where you can specify the title, which is a string, on author, which is a string, and it will return some data from a book type. So this could also be integer. It could have an exclamation mark here, which would tell you that it is required. I think that's how it works with mutations. And yeah, if you're passing the wrong type here, it would just send you an error message back, and you couldn't it wouldn't really hit your the application level code. It would just it would handle all the type checking and stuff before you even have to do with it. All right. That might look like this. So you add a book with a title, Fox and Socks, the authors, Dr. Seuss, and you will get the you will get the data back. For example, like the title will be returned, and the string you pass here will be the name of the author object, basically. So you can see this here. We have the title that we specified before. We have an author object with the name that we also passed before. Like if you would want to add more data, you could also use a mutation query to update the data set you put in there before, and then maybe add some release date for the books or something like this. So yeah, it has automatic type checking and documentation. So what can go wrong? Like if I ask a question like this, the answer is obviously a lot. Like type checking and the readable documentation are must-haves for secure APIs, in my opinion. But they aren't the only requirements. You also need proper authentication and authorization. You want rate limiting for certain functionality. For example, you don't want any denial of service attacks if you query some resource-intensive stuff. And you optionally only want trusted developers to be able to read your API documentation, because like if they aren't allowed to like query your API, they also don't really need to know which data is in there and how you can get it and stuff like this. The thing is that none of this is the case out of the box, at least for GraphQL.
What could possibly go wrong?
Yeah, right. So we have authorization issues, and these are one of the most common security issues in GraphQL. Because implementation authorization can be confusing, and if you're not using the best practices, it can also be quite tedious. So due to various connections between the different types that you can specify, as we've seen before, there can be many routes to the same data. For example, there could be multiple ways to retrieve posts from an author, even as part of an author type, to get all the posts by an author, or like you get the posts directly via an ID with another query. And if you don't implement your authorization checks consistently or in a central place, you can easily run into issues. Because you may just forget to apply the checks in a specific in a specific query that accesses some data that shouldn't be accessed by anyone apart from if they aren't authorized to do so. So GraphQL does not automatically take care of this. I think there are a lot of recommendations about how you should go about it. For example, you shouldn't do it like in every single place where you query data, but you should do it in a central place, and then call like a certain function to get the data, and then within that function you should do your authorization checks. Yeah, I mean it's not the ideal way to do things. To be fair, though, in a lot of REST API libraries, or if you implement a REST API yourself, you also don't necessarily have some way to do this easily and have to add your own logic if you don't use a framework that supports it, but rather some like very basic stuff or implement it yourself. So yeah, it's like GraphQL doesn't really do it in a straightforward way. But yeah, they aren't the only ones who have problems with this kind of issues. So next is denial of service. And yeah, there are like some problems with recursion. I mentioned this in one of the earlier slides. If you have a query like this and you get books and then the author and his books again, and then another author and so on, if you are stacking queries like this, you force the server to issue requests or write log files or execute other resource-intensive operations over and over again. And yeah, this is a very simple denial of service attack vector that is very hard to prevent and easy to abuse. Yeah, this is just due to the fact that there are almost no requirements on the attacker side in order to exploit this. Like they don't need a full-fledged botnet in order to like send a query like this. They could basically type all of this in like the whole payload into their phones if they are just bored enough. Like there's nothing very complex about it, and nothing very nothing that requires a lot of bandwidth or a lot of computations, or like a very powerful machine on the side of the attacker. Yeah, it's a bit unfortunate, and
yeah, it's weird, Sven. It's like it has like a loop built in without writing a loop kind of thing.
Yeah, kind of like that, exactly. It's like a very like very easy to exploit thing, and it's not very straightforward to prevent this. There are different approaches to it. For example, you could just prevent this recursion to a certain degree, which wouldn't really help you if you like have like, I don't know, 10 levels deep of these recursions and stuff, but have some very resource intensive operations that you have, and you will get a denial of service attack anyway, even if it's like limited to like a low number of these recursions and stuff. What you also could do is assign individual like score points to each of these types, and score them based on the complexity and like the based on how much computations, how much power you need to have in order to fulfill like the query. This is like not really straightforward in my opinion. So sometimes you don't even know which of your queries are that resource intensive, because maybe you run into some weird bugs that may only show if you're querying it like often enough, and maybe you have a weak backend microservice that you're querying that might just throw some rate limiting errors and stuff if you are using a query like this, and it wouldn't show up in your usual tests, so you aren't really aware of it. And like a score-based system is also not like the best thing to prevent this. So yeah, it's not easy. I think the most sane approach is still to prevent the death of these these stacked queries, and like optimize it in a way that it will not lead to denial of service attacks, even if like an attacker would abuse it like that. There are also other things you could do with stacking queries and sending multiple queries in one request. For example, if you have some check for a second author, second factor authentication, then you could just send, I don't know, like 60 or 600 or whatever, however much attempts within one query. And if you're only using rate limiting on top of your GraphQL API, then this will also lead to problems, because it will just be one request that your plans will see, and not like 600 that you're actually sending. So it can be really tricky to prevent stuff like this. I'm pretty sure there should be some middleware for you to handle this. And I think there's like a lot of middleware for GraphQL in particular, just because it's so customizable, and you can have a lot of use cases where GraphQL could be fitting, but it's missing some very basic stuff that would make it useful for your application. A lot of people implement this as middleware, and it is widely available. So you should really look into enhancing it with some like well-tested and established middleware for things like this. All right.
So by itself, you can't prevent it. You need to add that middleware to really make sure that it. I'm having flashbacks to when I was learning the wrong way on how to do recursion. It's bad when you get it wrong.
Yeah, it really is. Like we probably all that were programming in any language were having some issues with recursion in one way or another. And like it's really frustrating. I know it from my personal experience when I implemented something that was using recursion on purpose. Like if you use the recursive function, for example, to scan some directories and stuff like this, and then you have a slight error in there, and your browser will start to hang, or your application in general. Like it's frustrating, and like I guess it's the best way to showcase how annoying and like a difficult denial of service attacks like this can be, especially like if you were programming with it and like maybe had to restart your computer because it was just using your maxing out your CPU or your RAM or stuff like this. So yeah, I think it is a really good example on how you can get a feel for the annoyance of denial of service attacks.
Yeah.
So there's also a thing called secondary context path traversal, which I can tell you is also very difficult to detect, and maybe it's annoying a little bit, because one of the cool things you can do with GraphQL is just putting it on top of some legacy API and use it out of the box until you maybe have a better solution for it. And so it's still a little bit dangerous to talk to microservices via your API. It's not GraphQL specific. It's like that for other APIs as well. But so it's without proper sanitization, you may be able to interfere with the communication with microservices, especially in HTTP requests. So imagine a query like this. You just want to get some public posts from the author Alice, and then it should give you an array of posts back. It on the back and your microservice might have an API that works like this. You have your get posts by author endpoint, and then you will get the author name here, like some neat REST style yeah, and some REST style URLs. And it may return something like this, like an array with the author, who is Alice, with the content, and so on. And your GraphQL API will just proxy that back to you as like the posts field. Now imagine if you would specify an author like this. This will just like you're probably familiar with the double dot and then the slash, and it will basically go to the parent directory, and suddenly you will end up with a URL like this, where you don't get the post by author anymore, but want to get all the private messages from the users. And of course, like, the API will happily send this back to you, because a lot of the times the authentication, authorization is handled by the front end, and somewhere along the way the user context is just lost, and the API will just talk happily to the front end and without any authorization checks, because it just assumes that they were already done before, and the API server is aware of, like, the context of the user who wants to get all the data. And
so
obviously,
Sven,
like,
in this, I'm sorry, in this context, I send a request to GraphQL. GraphQL then basically proxies that off to another microservice. That microservice trusts whatever is coming from GraphQL, and then the response gets trickled back down to the user, essentially.
Yeah, exactly like this.
Gotcha.
That was well explained. It works like this, and it might lead to problems because the microservice inherently trusts the GraphQL API, and it isn't aware of, like, the path traversal issue there. So it will, it will basically give you back data that you shouldn't have access to.
Oh wow, that's like SQL injection on acid.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's also a good way to put it. True. Then there's, like, the last section of my slides, which is discovery. And the big question is, as a pen tester, what are you doing if you're running your directory fuzzing and use something like FAF to get some directories on the server, and you will see a GraphQL and GraphQL endpoint popping up in your in your output, and you have no idea what it does. Like, you don't have any additional context. Maybe it's a weird subdomain that is only giving you back the GraphQL API endpoint, and you don't know what to do with it. You may have a hard time understanding what data it accepts and what it actually does. It's especially annoying in combination with the type checking and some mandatory arguments that you may need to pass in order to get back certain data. And just tell you that you didn't, like, specify some required arguments. Luckily, there are a few tricks that may help you to figure out what input the API expects. Like, the first trick is using autocorrect. Actually, GraphQL has an autocorrect feature. And if you send a query like get psts without the O, GraphQL will just send you an error message stating that the name is invalid. In some cases, it might even correct you. So it will state that you likely wanted to write get posts instead of the missing O above.
Thank you.
As an attacker, this is kind of useful because you, like, can just throw a lot of stuff on the wall and see what sticks. And the feature works like this in Apollo. At least I think that's also an Apollo feature. I'm not sure if it's in the GraphQL standard or not, but I think some of the GraphQL frameworks implement this for you. This feature takes the editing distance into account.
What do you mean by Sven? What do you mean by editing distance?
It's an eigenvector. It's sorry, go ahead.
What?
It's an eigenvector.
Didn't-
It's how far away from the problem is the thing that like if you put GT instead of get, it wouldn't know to put posts in there because it's too far away.
Too far away. Okay, I got you.
Yeah,
Sorry.
that's right. Yeah, it will basically check how many of the like
Characters.
yeah, exactly. How many characters you are away from the from some existing fields and queries and stuff. So yeah, if you are, I think there was some research about it and some very specific number. I think the threshold was like 0.4 times something. I'm not really exactly sure. Like there was a great talk about it on some background level up talk. And yeah, by choosing certain word combinations, you're able to effectively brute force longer words with short letter combinations, and then reduce the amount of tries that it takes to actually to come up with something that is actually useful for you. So you can you can make it very effective to brute force some long lists of common fields without without sending all the data and maybe sending a lot of large requests or getting rate limited or stuff like this if these batched queries aren't supported. So that it's a neat trick to save you some tries and maybe even discover some queries mutations, stuff like this that you weren't even aware of or didn't have in your word list if they are just close enough to what you put in there. And like the even more popular thing to do, which is like really useful if you're a pen tester or a bug hunter or something like that, you can in some cases even retrieve the full schema, which is very cool. You can use a so-called introspection query for this. And yeah, what this basically is a special query that allows you to get information about certain queries and fields and even lets you reconstruct the whole schema. And the cool thing for a pen tester and the not so cool thing for a developer is that a lot of the GraphQL frameworks don't even have an option to disable the introspection queries, which is like unfortunate for you if you're developing an application and don't want anybody apart from your like trusted developers know how to use the API. I mean, it's obviously not really a security thing to hide your to hide your documentation for your APIs and then just hope that nobody will will find your heap dump endpoint or something like that. But yeah, I mean, it's still like in some cases useful to hide your API and not have let everybody know what data is in your API or what can be queried or which fields are available for all the for all your different endpoints and stuff. So yeah, the middleware you can use for this is sometimes very basic and will search for stuff like some double underscores for within queries or something like that. And yeah, you have to be aware of the middleware, what it does, and whether it's sufficient enough to prevent road introspection, but I meant road retrospection, but I meant introspection. But yeah, it's you should be aware of the middleware and if it's sufficient to prevent stuff like this. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if this messes with the view. I hope it doesn't. But this is a basic example for some. Can I zoom in a little bit more? Okay.
Yeah.
This is a basic example for some introspection query. Like you can get the name, you can get the fields with like the field names, and it's a really very useful thing to have if you're pen testing a GraphQL application.
Kind of sounds like Active Directory, which is super helpful about answering queries about what is on the domain. This is everything that's on your API, right?
Yeah, I'm not too familiar with Active Directory, to be honest. But yeah, if it has a similar feature like that, you really can appreciate like how useful it is to have it if you're an attacker, for example. So the conclusion: how secure is GraphQL? I would say, as I said in the beginning, that it is not less secure than any other ways to design your API. There are pitfalls that you need to be aware of, as we've seen. But like this is true for every technology you use. And I think with stuff like REST, you're even a little bit more on your own, because like you have a certain kind of standardization in there, but you are lacking the automatic type checking and like the forced documentation that your schema provides to you. And I think from a security perspective, this is very useful and like is really a great feature to have. And so in general, it's a great tool to use, in my opinion. It can improve bandwidth consumption if you're willing to deal with some of its complexity, because like, to be honest, it's very, it's tedious to write everything into your schema and then define like your resolver functions and then get the arguments from there. And yeah, it's a little bit easier with REST, but like the added benefits it can provide to you in terms of like the bandwidth consumption, in terms of avoiding some boilerplate code, and having one API for one endpoint for different parts in your front end is just super useful, and even saves you some headaches with versioning and stuff. So yeah, I mean, in general, I think GraphQL API is quite a cool thing to use, and I wouldn't just advise against using them just because of the security issues I mentioned before, because if you're aware of them, you can easily avoid them, or sometimes avoid them after some considerations in terms of like usability and some risks you might have with denial of service vectors, and if you come up with need to come up with some other maybe more creative solutions to avoid them. But yeah, I mean, that's as always, it's a trade-off between usability and security, and whether you want to use it or not is like depending on your use case and whether you want to have this additional overhead. And yeah, all right, that's basically my opinion about like the security of GraphQL, and I think it is a cool technology.
Sven, when you say that you can use middleware to potentially filter out these queries, what's an example of that?
I mean, for NPM, for if you're developing a Node application, there are a lot of tools you can just add for you. Usually, you would use the Express framework. Most likely for GraphQL. And GraphQL itself is is implemented as an Express middleware. Like I think the official GraphQL.js library is used like that. And I mean, you can add some more middleware on top of it to just inspect like the incoming requests and check whether the introspection query, whether it contains an introspection query, or maybe some other dangerous some other dangerous stuff, like maybe even like the recursion I've mentioned before. Like I'm not 100% sure if there's middleware for recursion, but probably there is something that you can use or like write on your own, maybe, because it's generally really easy to write middleware for that kind of stuff. So yeah, I mean, if there's there's a lot of stuff you can choose from, and maybe some settings within your GraphQL library, like in Apollo. I mean, I've mentioned that library in particular a lot, but just because it's like very mature and has a lot of features that will also save you some headaches and like security-wise and usage-wise. So
Sven,
that is.
Yeah. So if we were looking to start getting into doing some testing against and looking for some of these types of issues, what kind of tools would you recommend? Like something like Postman, or is there something better?
Yeah, I mean, the issue with GraphQL that is also like a little bit unfortunate is that even though it's been out since like some time now, that you haven't seen like adoption of it for some time, because like as you know, and a lot of projects like changes like changing your whole API for something else are really like slow and sometimes not even possible at all. And you have, even though you have GraphQL out for quite a while, the adoption is still increasing, and some companies are switching to it, and therefore also a lot of the security tools aren't there yet, because they will usually allow you to use stuff like I don't know, some post or get requests, and not really, or maybe even JSON, but not really some the type of requests you need to send in order to talk to a GraphQL API. And yeah, we are currently working on implementing GraphQL support in Netsparker, which will enable like a lot of our existing checks with GraphQL where it makes sense. And yeah, I mean, you will have a whole lot of existing checks just working out of the box with Netsparker with it. I'm not really aware of a way to test it with existing tools. Like there are probably some ways to use SQL map or stuff like this with GraphQL if you're using some creative tricks to get it to work.
Yeah, it looks like Sven Burp Suite has a module. It looks like it might have been contributed. It was last updated in August of 2019. It's called GraphQL Raider, but obviously, a little dated in an add-on module. I don't know if anyone's used it before, but
I have not. Yeah, and Postman for doing API stuff like that would be my go-to, and Postman does support GraphQL, but I haven't encountered anything that I've needed to use it against. So,
but obviously these are more manual testing tools, and Sven having
Postman
this in
supports Graph.
Yep.
There is a module, Josh, called GraphQL Raider.
If I was for Burp, Josh said Postman supports.
Oh, Postman supports.
Yeah,
sorry,
it does.
I did not know that.
But obviously,
Super
Sven,
cool.
Having it in Netsparker that's super awesome.
Some automation.
Yeah. I agree. The automated approach is a pretty good one when it comes to big APIs in particular. Like I think just as an example from as a very big API that supports introspection, I think, or maybe it has some good documentation. I read it somewhere, but I think it was GitHub that has like several thousand lines of code of schema definition, and like it can get very complex real quick.
Mm-hmm.
And doing that manually is first of all very tedious, and second of all maybe not even possible within like the time frame you have, and whether you are implementing some new features and add fields here and there, and you may want to have that instantly, or maybe within your SDLC, and like that is not really possible if you're just doing it manually or with some attack proxy or something like that. It's just like a matter of scale, and yeah, it might still lead to some missed vulnerabilities if you do it like that.
Outstanding. Any more questions, comments?
None.
I just want the light he's got in the background.
Want the microphone. Come on now.
The microphone and the light. I want the light and the microphone, okay?
Very
All right,
cool.
I'll send you some Amazon ref links if you want.
There you go.
Perfect.
Universal shopping.
Yes.
Sven, thank you so much for appearing on Paul's Security Weekly.
That was awesome.
Thanks for having me. It was fun as always.
This segment was sponsored by Invicti. Please visit securityweekly.com/Invicti. Next up is the security news, where there is an awesome high school prank that we'll talk about. Stay tuned. Keeping up with security issues across thousands of web assets without the right approach to web application security is a daunting task. Get ahead with web vulnerability scanning automation from Netsparker, a leader in dynamic and interactive application security testing known for its ease of use and accurate results. Detect a wide range of vulnerabilities in all legacy and modern web applications, address security bugs at scale by automating the confirmation process, automatically prioritize vulnerabilities, and assign actionable tickets to the right developers in their native workflows for rapid remediation. For more information on how to scale application security with ease, visit securityweekly.com/Netsparker. Qualys has brought together vulnerability management and patch management, letting security teams discover vulnerabilities and apply patches immediately, all within a single, unified app. Sign up for a free trial of Qualys VMDR, vulnerability management, detection, and response today at securityweekly.com/Qualys. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. InfoSec World 2021 is proud to announce its keynote lineup from this year. For this year, rather. Hear from Robert Herjavec, plus heads of security at NFL, TikTok, U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Stanford University, and more. Security Weekly listeners save 20% off on your digital pass. securityweekly.com/ISW 2021 to register today. Let's see. Don't miss any of your favorite Security Weekly content. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to any of our podcast feeds and have all new episodes downloaded right to your device. You can also join us on our mailing list, Discord server, follow us on social media and our streaming platforms, all at securityweekly.com/subscribe. Lots of news articles to cover this week. Where does everyone like to begin?
I think I'd like to take it to a somber note to right at the beginning. Your story number 15.
My story number 15. I'm scrolling. What was my... Oh, yes. So Kim Zetter tweeted. She's, of course, the Wired author, editor, and blogger, and the author of Countdown to Zero Day, which I believe all of us have read.
Yep, I have.
So in the book, and I mean, folks that haven't read the book, that are familiar with the story, know that A.Q. Khan was the Pakistani scientist that is known for stealing, I'll read her tweet, right? Stealing centrifuge designs from a Dutch company, then using that to launch Pakistan's illicit nuclear program, and then selling those designs and centrifuge parts to Iran, Libya, and North Korea. Has died. He's died from COVID, which is interesting.
I did not know that.
Or plutonium,
Or yes,
the official
thallium.
Thallium.
I mean, I didn't dig into the story and validate the cause of death, but it's listed, from Kim Zetter as COVID. So.
Yep, and if Kim's reporting it, I kind of trust that.
Yeah, I mean, she's upstanding journalist for sure.
Yep.
So.
Speaking of upstanding journalism.
Fake news.
Speaking of upstanding journalism, where did this one go of yours? Your story number 6.
Scrolling.
Missouri governor vows to prosecute St. Louis Post-Dispatch for reporting security vulnerability.
And this is just there's gonna be a couple of segues off of this one, right? It's a lot of. This one grinds your gears, man. You need to read this. So, Missouri governor has vowed to prosecute St. Louis Post-Dispatch, is a media outlet, for reporting a security vulnerability. This is according to Krebs on Security. The quote that I pulled out was, the newspaper said that it found that teachers' social security numbers were contained in the HTML source code of the pages involved. So their information was available to anyone with a web browser. Now, they disclosed this responsibly to the state of Missouri. Then the state of Missouri, I believe, fixed it before they then went public with it. I could be getting my stories mixed up, though. But the Missouri governor was saying, hackers are people who gain unauthorized access to things and commit heinous criminal acts, and therefore we are going to prosecute them to the fullest extent of the law.
And they did not have permission to do what they did. They had no authorization to convert or decode, so this was clearly a hack. Right click, view as source.
No hash. I think the governor of Missouri doesn't understand the CFAA. I am not an attorney by any stretch of the imagination, but I have to venture to guess that this is likely not going to be classified as hacking. Although, I mean, look at Weave's case. That that is also case law that is on the books too. So there's that. Again, I'm not an attorney, right?
Yep.
But I also thought that, I believe it was Aaron Mackey, who is a senior staff attorney at the EFF, said that Governor Parsons' response to this incident also was unfortunate because it will almost certainly give pause to anyone who might otherwise find and report security vulnerabilities in state websites that unnecessarily expose sensitive information, which also means such weaknesses are more likely to be eventually found and exploited by actual criminals.
I don't know if I'd give that. I wouldn't give that pause.
Okay,
I'd
so
report
what
it.
I'm hearing is, if I drop money on the floor outside of the bank, it's going to incentivize more criminals to come crack the vault.
No, I don't. That's not a good analogy, Josh. Love you, but that's not.
All right, then what's a good? I mean, because this is bullshit.
I think it's kind of. Yeah.
Not.
Maybe a little flawed. If I drop money outside the bank, if I drop money outside the bank, it might incentivize attackers to stand out in front of all the banks and waiting for someone to drop off money.
That's called panhandlers. It happens now.
Well, there's a difference in asking for it or just picking it up off.
Like if the tellers were leaving money like out in the parking lot like temporarily before they put it in the vault, and someone reported that, and then they wanted to prosecute them, but now actual criminals are going to stand in the parking lot and pick up the money and steal it.
And I think in this case, like they're saying, you're not allowed to look at the encoded data.
Yeah, like pay no attention to the money sitting on the curb.
They put a piece of plain copy paper over the top of the money.
Right.
You're not allowed to look at that.
I've got it. If
how are you going to enforce
the vault out of money? If you build the walls of the vault out of money, and people start taking the money, you're like, oh my God, you're hacking, you're cracking the vault, you're breaking into the vault.
Sort of.
Like that's literally what we're talking about. They literally made the walls of the vault out of money, and then they're bitching that people take it.
I do want some of what you've been smoking tonight, though, Josh.
Drinking.
There you go. Tequila.
That, right?
There you go.
Yeah, Tyler, to your point, how do they enforce that? Like,
speaking of which, can I have the bourbon?
If you don't report it, then there's no crime that happened, right? Like, I'm not seeing that correlation, because if you report it, then you've committed the crime. It is still there. It is still in the source code. So if you do not report it, you therefore have not committed the crime. But you can still see it because view source is available to anybody that has access to a browser.
Mm-hmm.
So the enforcement piece, like, this can't stand up because that'll set horrible precedents from an enforcement and jurisdiction standpoint. Like, whose property is that? Is that on the hosting provider? Because that's just direct code you're reviewing. That's not necessarily their property.
I mean, and let's be clear. When you get a web page, the copy of the web page is sent to you.
Mm-hmm.
It is now on your...
that means it is intended for you.
But
and
I also
own it because it's code on your machine.
Governor Parsons
given to you.
Governor Parsons said it is unlawful to access encoded data in systems in order to examine other people's personal information. But now, based on what you just said, the response of that is stored in my browser. Mm-hmm. It's not encoded.
Yeah, it is. It's encoded in HTML.
That's not encoded.
Yeah.
I'd argue that. I'd argue that in court. I'd have an expert witness to talk about what encoded is.
And I think he's confusing encoded and encrypted.
Could be.
He's conflating them. Yeah.
Could be.
But I mean, so we're talking about. I literally get the web page sent to my machine.
Lee,
it is on my machine. It is in my hard drive. Sorry,
Lee was trying to talk, but he was on mute.
Oh, I'm sorry, Lee.
He's still on mute.
Lee's still on mute.
It's the other mute, Lee.
Lee, get younger.
Talk louder, Lee. Nope.
Josh is amazing. Oh my God, it's amazing how smart he is.
This does set bad precedents for like bug bounties and stuff though too. Like you start to think about who reports information to you, who's actually doing the testing. If you don't have a bug bounty program, if you don't have an internal security team, if you don't have a pen test team looking at this stuff actively, which most state governments, small budgets, you should be very, very considerate of those people that are reporting stuff to you, because that's almost a free service. Even if you're giving them a small amount of info or a small amount of money, monetary value for this, that's still something. And if you don't treat them well, you don't have anybody looking at that, and bad guys are just taking it anyway. So if it's there, it's there.
Yeah, I mean, so the quote here says a hacker. I'll qualify that. I mean, what they really mean is a malicious hacker is someone who subverts computer security with malicious or criminal intent. In this case, Joe Martineau said there was no breach of any firewall or security and certainly no malicious intent. He says the Department of Missouri or DESE is deflecting its failures by referring to this as hacking is unfounded.
Mm-hmm.
What's the crime against the Missouri teachers that he's committed?
I'm glad you brought that up, Lee. Yes. Go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to step on you.
Because I'm looking at it, the application exposed their social security numbers. That's where there's accountability against the teachers. This guy who discovered it committed no crime against those teachers. I think he's going with every straw he can grab here.
I am siding with you, Lee, in saying the state of Missouri should be held accountable for mishandling personally PII of the teachers.
Well, I mean, this is only going to cost the taxpayers more money if they get sued for it, because the governor is saying that fixing the flaw could cost the state $50 million.
I can fix it. I can fix it for like $1 million. Like, you give me $1 million, I'll go in and fix it.
Look.
750,000.
I'll do it for $750,000.
What's the penalty for the PII disclosure going to be on this one? How many?
Right.
How much is that going to cost? That's going to be a fortune. But yeah, what do we know?
It was 100,000 social security numbers were available.
Just to be clear, anybody who's ever navigated to that site has a copy of that in their cache.
Correct.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sorry, and DESE is the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education in the state of Missouri.
I wonder, is it still there? Has anybody checked?
They said they've removed it. But yeah,
did they say? Yeah, I was
reportedly removed the affected pages from its website Tuesday. That means there's probably 7 or 8 more that are affected that they just haven't found yet.
We're getting some comments. Is this reminding people of coal fire? And do we have data breach law in Missouri? I'm wondering if they have a vulnerability.
All states have data breach.
It's not a data breach. It's just a surprise distributed backup.
This is true.
It only counts as a backup if you can restore it.
Oh, I mean, yeah, you just go get it from Have I Been Pwned. You're all good.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Oh, boy.
Oh, my God. Sorry. I went right for the deep end, didn't I?
No, because it's good because it ties into several other stories that we have.
It does. It does.
We can pivot now to the Telegram vulnerability.
Yep. Which is very related to some of the Apple stuff.
Yes. So let's do Telegram.
Yep.
So the bug or the vulnerability in Telegram was basically they had a self-destruct. I think that's what they called it in the article, was a self-destruct feature in Telegram that was released somewhat recently from what the article described. But basically, I go to Telegram and I go self-destruct, delete the application and all data is what you would believe that it would mean. But a researcher, Dimitri, his full name is in the article, Dimitri reported the bug to Telegram, which basically Dimitri discovered that, hey, when I self-destruct the app, it still leaves a whole bunch of files behind. And I don't think it's necessarily the vulnerability and the impact and or severity of the vulnerability that's in question. Dimitri reported this bug to Telegram in March. The firm acknowledged it. It didn't fix the bug for several months, despite other updates coming out for the Telegram client that were updates likely to features and maybe some other bugs, but not this particular bug. The researcher reminded them. The August 2021, the researcher confirmed that it still wasn't there. Then more problems happened. In response, Dimitri sent some questions to Telegram regarding the agreement he was supposed to sign. Never got a response. Researcher Dimitri noticed a lesser bounty was offered to him, and they wanted him to remain silent about this vulnerability, at which time Dimitri decided to forego any bug bounty payment and go for full public disclosure of this vulnerability tracked to CVE 2021-41861.
LCANETA.
Again, just the way that you treat researchers, it's the same issue that I have with Apple. Like, now Telegram's getting bad press over the treatment of a researcher, but like, what does it cost Telegram to treat the researcher nicely and respectfully and just fix the bug? Isn't that less than what, like, trying to hide it and coming under the scrutiny and now having the news outlets report that this happened? Also very interesting for bug bounties too, where even if you're offering the security researcher money, that's not enough for them to stay quiet. They'll make it public and forgo the bug bounty. Like, it's a real interesting situation with bug bounties.
I mean, we talked to Casey Ellis recently, and the bug bounty world is definitely changing.
Josh froze.
Apparently, somebody found a bug and didn't report it.
Audience that we're talking shit about.
Sorry, Josh, you broke up there.
Oh, okay. I was wondering, when we were talking to Casey Ellis, there were several people in the audience who were really talking crap about HackerOne and BugCrowd. It was interesting.
When did you talk to Casey?
Security and Compliance Weekly, like 2 weeks ago.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, just before I moved over here.
It's funny. I've been wanting to have Casey on the show to have this conversation about bug bounties. Casey and I've actually talked about him coming on the show to talk about it. And I was just thinking today, reading these articles that were involving bug bounties, like, I really need to get Casey in the official system so we reach out and officially ask him to be on the show and not.
He's in the system. The problem is he's in Australia, so you have to set it up ahead of time because for him, this is going to be about. We were on at noon, and it was 2 a.m. for him. Actually, This time might be better for him. It might be like 7 or 8 a.m.
Right.
Yep. Depending on which coast he's on, he's about 12 to 14 hours ahead.
Yeah, it was 14 hours because it was noon for us and 2 for him. So,
I think the confidentiality thing is really irking to me, especially if there's a bug bounty involved. I think there should be language that is established beforehand, perhaps. I mean, maybe it was an official like bug bounty thing, but like the researcher should know if they discover a vulnerability, roughly what they're going to get paid. And then, like, are they going to be able to talk about it publicly or not? Or is it ever going to come out publicly? And I think that could impact the bug bounty program.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, there's from the researcher's point of view, there's always problems. Sorry, I shouldn't say that. From the researcher's point of view, there's potentially always problems. They've got it's a duplicate bug, we're not paying you. Well, nobody else has reported it. Oh, we just haven't put it in the system yet. There's a lot of several researchers that are complaining about the way that bug bounties are handled by the official or unofficial programs. So I agree with you that things should be laid out ahead of time and kept up to date very, very religiously. Otherwise, you're going to have very pissed off people that are just going to be like, yeah, you know what? Sounds like a 0 day. I'm going to go sell this sucker.
See, I think blockchain could solve this, right? Like if we put this on the blockchain and you report it and it gets recorded as a transaction with, some encryption key at a timestamp, that gets put to the blockchain, and then there's non-repudiation to what's being reported when by who, and that can be validated by third-party sources.
Well, I think you're right, Tyler. I think there needs to be a really good chain of evidence and custody, so to speak. But I also think that there needs to be very clear-cut rules in bug bounties. In a couple of the instances this week even, and in the past, companies try and play with two different variables, right? The amount of time that they have to fix something and the amount of time that they're willing to let go before something becomes public. Sometimes it's changed to never, right? Those need to be established beforehand. How much time you're going to give the vendor to fix it. And I realize that that's not just everyone has 30 days kind of thing. Some people do have that policy, and that's fine. I'm not opposed to it, but I also think there needs to be some exceptions where you can kind of apply for more time to fix it to a certain point. Then there is a hard stop. And then there needs to be a very clear-cut policy about when it becomes public. And maybe that has a couple of tiers as well. But you can't let it go on forever, and you can't change the rules while you're playing the game. You're right.
Wait, you've played board games with my 8-year-old?
Yes, it's like playing board games with an 8-year-old, Larry. Absolutely, it is. Because during the I find a bug, I report it, and then they go, well, we want more time. We want more time. We want more time. Well, once we fix it, and then 2 weeks goes by, you can publicly disclose it. But then, after some time goes by, they're like, oh no, wait, you can never disclose this. Like what? It's exactly like changing the rules of a board game, playing it with your children.
Yep. And I think that's why using something like Assert is helpful for doing some of that, because they can back you on the, hey, no, you said.
Right.
We heard you. We have witnesses that you said, 2 weeks after this. And, I think that's one of the other hard things, too, about, some of these researchers, especially some of the big companies like Apple. It's like you need to be able to stand your ground and say, no, you said a month. I gave you another 3 months. And then I gave you another 3 months after that. You're done.
But I mean,
you mean like a smart contract that's on a blockchain?
Right.
I knew it.
Wow.
Whoa. Mind blown.
I knew it.
Something like self-validation
Tyler's
right
about
there.
to do smart contracts. I have to preempt that.
Yeah. It's like a quadruple proof
I was-
accounting. Sorry, Lee.
So what's been going through my head with this is that in 2020, DHS put out a requirement for all federal agencies to implement a vulnerability disclosure program, which by September 2022 has to include all federal systems and all agencies. But there's no mention of bug bounty. It's got the reporting, the disclosure, the resolution, the response, but no money involved. So I'm thinking, if you have a vulnerability disclosure program and I find a vulnerability, but there's no bounty, what's the incentive to not reveal it?
No, there has to be some. There has to be some incentive, Lee. I agree with
Right.
With,
So
with
that means we got to get Alan Friedman over here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at binding operational directive 20-01 for those of you playing at home, and I'm not finding any mention of money. Now I could be missing it. Please, it's okay. Correct me, but I'm just like,
But it's also
weird.
It's a good point, Lee. And I'm okay with that if they say it's $0. Like, as long as we all know that going in that it's $0, that's fine. But where also a lot of companies play games is, well, that was $10,000, but now it's $5,000. Or, you may have thought that was a $50,000 payout, but we assessed the severity, and that's only a $5,000 payout. Like, you're playing games. And some of these companies are gigantic. And the difference between $5,000 and $30,000, like, you can go hire a security team to go find all the bugs in your software. Guess what? It's probably going to cost you way more than $30,000, right? So just like pay out the bounty. Like, they seem to be leaning away from supporting the security research and more towards just overly scrutinizing and kind of patronizing the security researchers.
What about if you don't even want monetary?
You get a free.
You need a reprisal, right? Like, you need to be able to have that get out of jail free card. Like, I'm doing you a favor. This is public info. We've done several of those reporting, and it's a little sketchy to even do it. Like, you don't usually use your real name. You brokerage it, or you do it through a persona, because some of those companies. There's a great example, the Missouri one. Like, they don't always treat you very well. Like, if you'd done this through a persona, or they had done this in a different manner, like, maybe the guy wouldn't be in trouble, and that's not a good precedence to set either way.
If you don't want money, you get a free Space Force hat.
I would be good with that.
I would be good with that.
I can make a tinfoil hat at home.
As long as they're disclosing that beforehand, I'm okay with that.
Do they have to report all of the monitoring stuff that they put in said hat?
Yeah. The other point too is, though, I think there's this in my mind there's a notion that, like, once I discover the bug, like, the risk is starting to go up from the point of discovery, because now, like, if I am testing some software, website, or whatever it is, it doesn't matter, right? And I find a vulnerability. Now at least I know there's one person in the world that knows about it. The instant that I disclose that to the vendor, now there's X number of more people that know about this vulnerability. I think it's safe to assume that the longer time goes on, there's even more people that know about the vulnerability, therefore increasing the risk that this information is going to eventually leak out to more and more people the more time goes on. What if there's an insider that is seeing this stuff come through and go, oh wow, like there's a huge 0 day in a Microsoft product, because that never happens. And like the more time goes on, the more people are going to be aware, because the more people have to collaborate to fix that vulnerability, to test the code that's been implemented to fix that vulnerability. Now more people know about it. They talk to their friends. Maybe Russians drop off a few $100,000 at their doorstep, and they're like, hey, I know about this 0 day. Not many other people know about it, but if you're going to drop off a big bag of money on my doorstep, I'll tell you about it, and that's fine. So I think it's in the company's best interest to fix these things as fast as possible, because the more time goes on, potentially the more people are going to know about this vulnerability.
So you mean like Zerodium or the Grok, right?
Yes. I mean, it doesn't matter to the organization, right? The point is that, people talk, and just inherent in the process, more people are going to know about the vulnerability the longer it goes on.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, but the thing is, it does not require tradecraft, any trench coats or funny hats, although I do have the funny hats. But all you really need to do is hit up the Grok on Twitter, and he'll fly you to Thailand if you've got a really good 0 day, or you call Zerodium and they buy it from you with contractual language and taxable income.
But that's a great point, Josh, in the sense that the more time goes on, the more frustrated I am as a researcher, and the more inclined I might be to go, screw it, I'm going to go sell it, right?
Yep. It's legal to do so to Zerodium.
Right.
Like it's just literally that simple. They'll be like, here's a contract, sign it, we'll give you a check. You have to pay taxes on that because it's a legal transaction.
Right. Can I go sell it to Iran? I know
not unless you want to run.
There was a couple of weeks ago where there is case law now, right? That I can't sell weapons to known enemies of the state, and that could be considered a weapon, right? So
nothing to Larry.
Right. Enemies.
You can't sell it to me, but you can give it to me for free.
No, I think in that case you can't give it. I don't think you can give it away. You give it away.
Export laws
either, right? Export laws come into play. But to Josh's point, if you want to sell it to an organization that's their business and they buy it and it's all above board and on book, I can do that.
You could just conveniently leave it on this unhackable system connected to the internet,
right?
And I'll go get it myself. It's fine, right?
Yeah, disclosure. I think it's fascinating that so many of our stories talk about disclosure.
Yeah, this week
and it's something we've been talking about for 16 years, and there's still so many nuances. So let's talk about.
And to make this even better, I think maybe even to segue into some of your stories, that in the 16-year history, we talked about a lot about one particular company and their disclosure.
Yes,
and that they fucked it up.
Johnny Cash, David Maynard, right? Still sticks in my mind to this day.
They got wireless driver vulnerability. They got way better, and now they're back fucking it up again.
Because there is yet another researcher, Tokarev. What's his full name? I need to get better at putting the person's full name.
Which story of this is yours?
Because part of the problem is attribution. But also recognizing the security researcher, which is why sometimes I feel bad that I copy a quote, for our notes. Yep. And Dennis Tokarev is the person that found multiple vulnerabilities in was iOS, Apple iOS, and so there's the whole timeline, right, that happened. So in total, Dennis found 4 iOS 0-day exploits, reported them to Apple between March and May 4th, I believe, of this year. In September, he published the proof of concept exploit code and details on all iOS vulnerabilities after the company, one, failed to credit him after patching one of the vulnerabilities in July, but also asked him never to speak of them ever again. Which again goes back to my previous points of there should be some rules of engagement about how much money I'm getting paid, how it would be attributed, and when or if these vulnerabilities should be publicly disclosed by the researcher and or the vendor. All that shit should be worked out beforehand. Apple's changing the rules as they go. And I really think Apple, especially being a large tech giant, is just shooting itself in the foot. Like, how much effort would it take to, first of all, credit the researcher?
Yep.
Like, why not credit the researcher? Like, what's the motivation for not crediting the researcher? Like, properly disclose those vulnerabilities. Microsoft does it. Google does it. Like, what's the harm? We're already talking about them. Now you've pissed off the researchers so much that they're publicly disclosing them. Like, why not like have a nice process for that? Why have this like shit show of a public relations issue when you don't have to deal with the fact? Okay, and then, we make software. We had vulnerabilities. Like, everyone that creates software has vulnerabilities. We get it, Apple. It's okay. Like, you can tell us that you have software vulnerabilities. We're going to be cool with that. We're not going to trash you for having software. Well, maybe not as bad.
I think we hit a nerve.
Oh, dude, it's because we talked about this with Patrick Wardle. Right, we talked about it with Patrick Wardle. Yep. We've talked about it with so many, and not just specific people, but it's also been disclosed in the press that pretty much every researcher that is finding and disclosing vulnerabilities in Apple products has a bad experience, is kind of the vibe I'm getting. Like, they've all had a bad experience in some way. And I just think it's more damaging for Apple to hide under the veil of secrecy and treat researchers like crap than it would be for them to just own up and go, yeah, there was a vulnerability. This nice person found it and disclosed it for us. Like, good for them. Like, thank them and pay them, and, part of their program and pay them some money. And then say this was the vulnerability, and that this is how we fixed it. Like, what's the issue? Why? I don't get it.
Now, some of the things that I've got weird that is very strange here, and I wish I knew the way that things are stitched together. After he posted the stuff to his blog about the 0 days and posted the code, Apple said, "Yeah, sorry, we saw your blog. Sorry, we're still investigating some of these and how we can address them to protect our customers." Yet they had already patched some of them and not given them credit.
Right.
The other question that I've got is, like, did he like completely waive off their vulnerability disclosure program? Because one of these that he reported was $100,000 payment from their bug bounty program. Could be $100,000 program until they change the rules.
Until they change the rules and go, no, we're only going to pay you $10,000. Thank you very much.
It'll I bet, I don't want to bet, and I don't know the whole story here, but I conjecture that one of the bugs that was fixed was the $100,000 one that they didn't credit him for, which he then published, and they'll say, no, you published this outside of the bug bounty, we're not giving you the money. That would not surprise me in the least.
I mean, $100,000 to Apple is like a dollar, a quarter, like pocket change to us, right?
Yeah, found a penny on the sidewalk,
right? But also, they didn't have to employ a full-time employee to work and find these. Like, you got the results without incurring any of the overhead. Pay the bug bounty.
Yeah,
and I mean, let's be frank, finding one, let alone 4 0 days in iOS is an amazing feat. I mean, I think we can all agree that that's a pretty amazing feat.
Yeah.
Bloody hell, yes.
I was fired up.
Hey, where's that bourbon over there?
I
need a refill. You have it over there.
Anyway.
Give the man with the fangs the bourbon. Come on.
But so also I find it interesting. So in this whole my soapbox thing, now I'm going to rant even more. I mean, not only like are these companies, sorry, here's the bourbon, pour me some too while I'm talking. Well, I'm going to continue to rant because now, we're changing the rules about how it's disclosed, when it's disclosed, who is credited, how much is paid. The other thing is they may just decide to sue you for it too. Like, you throw that into the whole mix. And there is, where is my story?
Where are you going? A
consortium that is, did I delete the story by accident?
No, don't say you did.
I might have deleted the story by accident because there is an initiative to prevent researchers, thank you, Larry, from being sued. So they're looking to, and I might have deleted, so this came from the register. So 0 Day Hunters are seeking laws to prevent vendors from suing them from doing their jobs. So the Cybersecurity Advisors Network, a Paris-based body that represents InfoSec pros, has created a new working group to advocate for legislation that stops vendors from suing when researchers show them zero-day bugs in their software. Now, this is interesting because as much as I want to rant about Apple and other vendors that are doing heinous things with their bug bounty programs and in disclosure, this is like, how do you differentiate a legitimate security researcher trying to do responsible disclosure on a bug from a criminal or someone with other kinds of intent in a law, right? That could get that's kind of a slippery slope. Like if you pass a law that says software companies cannot sue an individual or company because they have discovered a zero-day or flaw or vulnerability in their software, how do you put language in there to like prevent a use case where it is kind of in the vendor's best interest to stop someone from disclosing a flaw? I mean, let's be frank, there are instances of this for the greater good and public safety where you may not want that to happen and you may have to take legal action in order to prevent that. So that's kind of one where I'm a little softer on.
Doesn't this sound a lot like what happened with a few years ago with I'm going to say it wrong, the Wassenaar Treaty, when they were trying to add things like Metasploit and other research/hacker tools to it as basically being weapons?
Yeah, like what's a hacker tool, right? Like,
yeah,
you know, you can't have Bash on your system because that could be used as a hacker tool.
Yeah,
and isn't that open source tooling as well? I mean, come on, open source tools are evil.
Evil.
Clearly.
Yeah. Closed source all the way.
Old man boomer.
Wow.
Most definitely.
I couldn't resist, Neil Lee. I'm sorry.
It's
yeah,
okay.
I just, I think
boomer.
that one's, I applaud the efforts, but I think it's a slippery slope. I think we should work to find a way to like take off the table that if a legitimate security researcher, you have to define what that is, right? Discovers a vulnerability. Problem is you got to define what that is. That the vendor can't sue them, right?
How do you, if you get caught hacking, then like you just claim you're doing research as a security researcher, and then do we have to get like the PI license where we have to certify as
to be a licensed security researcher, right? And then how do you prevent criminals from becoming licensed security researchers? Like there's a whole rabbit hole that you can go down. Again, I applaud the efforts. Based on my previous rant, obviously I really like this initiative, but I think it's going to be a tough one to get through.
Didn't Tyler say that's all better with blockchain?
Yeah, blockchain solves all of the problems.
Blockchain is fixing the world.
So,
I did have that story. Sorry, that story was my story number 2.
Okay. Well, there it is. Okay. So, I was actually wondering if you wanted to talk about something a little less
serious.
Well, I do, but I also think that my story number 16, another story about my favorite story of the week, the high school student that hacked IoT devices and rickrolled an entire school district, that also ties into disclosure. Mm-hmm. Now, I am very happy that this had a happy ending. Right? This is
because we all know you like happy endings.
This is like I'm really glad.
Really bad.
Like at the end of this movie, that it was a happy ending, because the alternate ending could have been really, really ugly. And we've just covered cases where the ending is not so happy in a lot of these other movies or stories.
And admittedly, he was smart, and that he said right in the article that he automatically sent the report to the security, the IT security group, and didn't schedule the meeting to sit down with them face to face until after he had graduated and received his diploma.
This student, I want to hire this person. This person has a shining career in information security. Just throwing that out there. He didn't work alone. I don't know if it's a he or she, but they did not work alone, because I don't think he disclosed he or she did not disclose their identity.
Yes, they did.
They did.
He mentioned some of their handles, but he didn't disclose their names. He wasn't working alone, but man, I want to grab that whole team.
I don't know if it was a he or she or that doesn't matter. I don't think the person disclosed their name or identity. Is that correct? They're still posting under. We'll call him White Hood Hacker. Is the handle? I could have
sworn that no. I could have sworn that
if they listed their name, I'm more than happy to give them credit because.
Terribly sorry. What was the handle?
White Hood Hacker.
That's terrifying.
Well, I think it's a metaphor for like white hat, black hat, hackers wear hoodies kind of thing.
So you go to the blog entry, you click home. Hi, I'm Min. I do cybersecurity. I'm an 18-year-old security researcher studying computer science at the University of Illinois.
I didn't click home. Okay. Min, you're awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. Well, and
I'm glad.
But the other guys and gals who are with him, he just listed them as further colors. He had he had purple, red, and green as the 3 other high schools, but did not give their names out.
Right, because they did not want to be included in the debrief.
I do want to point out, like
his Twitter picture is the Cyber Patriot shirts. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, like other there's a lot to the story. So I'll start with the kind of technical details. That Min noticed that there were lots of vulnerabilities in the AV media system. Calls out very specific vendors and 3 different products inside of this externity AV media players, Avidia player, Avidia stream, Avidia server. Discovered lots of vulnerabilities on there.
I'd say 3 different components of the same system.
Right. Web interfaces, SSH servers, enumerated vulnerabilities, did a lot of network scanning.
Default credentials.
And it sounded like these...
Insecure password, insecure credential storage.
Right. And these AV or media players were part of an architecture that went across the entire school district. I think you said 10,000...
11,000.
11,000 students in this particular school district, and realized these were all interconnected. And then had this idea that they were going to essentially rickroll everyone in the school district. But, I mean, this was a very well thought out and very well crafted and coordinated attack, which was... I think it really exemplifies the impact when you can do this type of exercise and test, which Min did without permission, which is why I don't like when people do this without permission. I get very nervous, and I don't recommend it. It was a very happy ending, but it was done without permission. But so it basically. Constructed this attack and designed this attack where essentially by compromising these devices, installing a custom script on them, which required testing. So what Min had to do was basically log into a computer that was in a classroom, I would assume is from the picture, that had a webcam on it.
It was the security cameras.
Was it the security camera or PC? I couldn't tell from the article.
I think it was the security system.
So he had like live video footage being streamed back to him while he hacked into the AV system and did his testing while classes were not going on. So the classroom is dark.
Yep. Sorry. I would connect to one of the PCs in the computer lab with a front-facing camera.
With a front-facing camera, so he could see the projector that was in the room that he was connected to, and then was testing the script because he didn't have this, equipment. In his house, he had to remotely go into the school on a PC with a webcam and then hack into the AV system that was projecting on the wall and send it commands and try and figure it out and hack it and go, okay, I can play, basically construct it so that they could play a movie. Okay. I mean, there's a lot more other technical details in the article as well. But what I also found was amazing, which many of us have done on pen tests, like how do I exemplify these vulnerabilities without... 1, doing damage to systems, and 2, disrupting any school activities. They were extremely aware. They're like, we don't want this to happen during exams. We don't want this to happen during class time. We don't want anything to be impacted in the school system. So they coordinated the attack after like the bell rang or like when the bell was going to ring. So classes were over took over the AV system, ran a countdown simultaneously. I don't know how many devices played this, but it was at full volume. Also, they kind of took into account if the device was turned off, it would actually turn back on and crank the volume up to full and rickrolled everyone in the entire school district simultaneously.
And 45 seconds before it started, not only did they turn the device on, they made sure that the input was set to the correct input source.
Like, I just unbelievable planning. Amazing, but also ensured that like nothing was damaged. They removed the script when they were done. Nothing was damaged. Nothing was impacted. Again, it was after classes, not while exams were going on, and executed this attack. Wrote up an entire full report, shared that with the school district. To the school district's credit, they were not expelled, and no criminal charges were pressed. And they even did a Zoom call, right, with the school district and explained in detail everything that they found, all of their findings, and how to fix the vulnerability. Just like hats off. Again, my only concern is that, that they might have tried to press charges, but knowing what little I know about the CFAA and in Title 18, how would you prove damages? Like they didn't. Students were singing and teachers were dancing. Like how are you going to prove damages? Like you made everyone sing and dance, therefore you're evil and cause damage.
And I think maybe that they took it in very good heart along the lines of the senior prank
kind of thing.
That arguably many other senior pranks that I've heard of have caused significantly more damage.
Maybe not even using computers, right? It was like shaving cream and stuff when I was in junior high.
Maybe the Missouri governor should go talk to the school board.
No.
Some heads need to roll,
And allegedly he found there were 2 additional 0 days with the media players that he did not release as part of this. And I would hope that he's going through some ethical disclosure.
Right. And hopefully not getting sued by the vendor.
Yep.
And hopefully he's being treated nicely by the vendor.
This kid is a freshman in college. He's already got his OSCP.
Yep.
Wow.
Let's put it this way. When I found this during someone was sent this.
He has an interview with in Guardians?
He actually he does not, because we've respected his rights to go to college and earn himself a degree. But certainly after he graduates, we'd be interested in speaking with him. I do know of at least one other person that was in that community that it was released has already reached out to him and is potentially already offering him a job.
No, it's awesome.
And the joke came up because the comments were, we need to get this guy in Larry's IoT hacking course.
Yeah.
So, might be a thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Just my one of my favorite stories we've covered in.
Yep. If nothing else, it's going to get used as a case study in the course.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
Yep.
And again, like, if Min had asked for permission, like, let's just play this. Like in classic, like what if, Marvel kind of style. What if Min had asked for permission? I don't think the story would have ended. Like if Min had gone and said, like, hey, I want to rickroll the entire district, and I'm going to do it in a safe way, they probably would have said no. And would they have really fixed all the vulnerabilities? Like this was so impactful, but in such a positive way. I mean, it showed the vulnerabilities with an impact that was very visible. I mean, you could see and hear, and really, really feel the impact of this particular vulnerability that I think really led to compelling the school district to go, we really want to fix these things. If he had said, well, I found that, you've got this issue with SSH or whatever, they might have been like, they're not so motivated to fix it.
Well, here's the thing.
To bother me,
This is also a kid that is a good kid. They're not like this kid has been leading teams in CTFs for years there. He's been, I had to put the background on because
I love the background. It's great.
He led teams in CTF for years. He led the Cyber Patriot and the First Robotics teams. This is one of those kids that the administration was like, Min did it? All right.
Right.
Yep. Min and his buddies did it? Yeah.
He had already established himself as a leader in the community, to your point,
exactly.
Josh. Right.
Reputation preceded him.
Yeah.
Yep.
Exactly.
That said, it was still illegal.
That too, yes.
Not arguing that point.
Nope.
Yeah, I mean technically, but you'd also have to prove damages.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's the point that I come back to.
Well, I mean, CFAA,
it does require you prove damages, though.
But what was it? Computer trespass? Like he accessed the system without permission?
Sure, but did he steal data? No. Did
Wait.
He was authorized in that system because he did some AV work in the school. I read that in one of his posts.
Interesting.
So he actually did not perform a CFAA violation.
But did he steal data? Technically, I would argue that he did because he discovered that one of the systems had a list of passwords.
He was authorized.
Was he, though?
The Moran case.
Was he authorized for that system?
Doesn't matter. There's no gateways. There's no gates in place. Sorry. Doesn't matter. The new interpretation of the CFAA, as per I think it's the Moran case that just happened, or the Van Buren case, or something like that, like literally just happened a few weeks ago. If there's not an actual gate, virtual or physical, in front of the information you want protected, sorry.
Yeah, no, we talked about that.
Okay.
We talked about that. I think that was the Van Buren case. Yeah,
but technically there was a gate. It was a username and password.
That's not technically considered a gate.
Is HTML considered a gate?
Wow.
It's only a programming language for Larry.
Wow. I'm just saying if Min has to go to court on this, there's an attorney that I don't even think it's going to trial in my opinion.
He's not going to trial.
He's not going to trial.
No.
This is dismissed. Because he didn't cause damages. How are they going to prove damages? Still to prove damages.
They didn't even try. They didn't even charge him. So there's no case to dismiss.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's interesting. You look at Missouri, and they said they did want to press charges with a lesser, in my mind, a lesser offense.
Yeah,
but you could prove damages there.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, Larry. It is a good point.
Can you prove damages though?
I got a boogie. Public? Sorry, guys.
Thanks, Josh.
Thank you, Josh.
Bye, Josh.
Have a good night.
He's probably gonna blow his nose. He's got a boogie.
I mean,
sorry, Lee.
No, I wanted to switch stories when we were done.
I think we're done.
Yeah, I think we're done.
Because I got a lot of interesting stories, but the one that kind of got me was my number 5, where they were talking about, over 60s being targeted. I didn't like the article because it was kind of commercial for products, but I was looking at it and going, do those guys know the basics, about having good endpoint protection and, how to defend themselves, without you becoming their go-to phone call whenever anything goes bump in the night on their computer? Mm-hmm. And looking at it from that perspective, I was thinking, we should be, the seniors in our lives, we should be getting them basic cyber hygiene. And if you're not sure what that means, that article can give you a starting point.
No, it's a great point, Lee, because that in that age demographic, those are folks that didn't grow up with the technology that, if you were born after a certain time, you grew up with computers and the internet.
Yep. Yeah. So, I think about, how susceptible some of like our parents are to some of that type of stuff. Like I think about, my mother-in-law who got a new computer because her old one wasn't working. There was something wrong with her browser. I don't even want to know. Like, I can probably guess, but there was something wrong with her browser. So she just went out and bought a new computer, but she couldn't remember her password for her Facebook account. So she created a new one.
Right.
Like, this is the type of level of sophistication. But not realizing that she could remember the password to her email, which she could have used Facebook to send her a password reset to her email. But instead, she created a new account.
Again, it's folks that didn't grow up with technology.
Yep, agreed.
Obviously not everyone, but majority didn't.
Yep.
If you didn't work in the field, right, or have that as a hobby, you didn't grow up with technology. So.
Right. I'm avoiding making Lee jokes here.
Well, yeah.
But Lee's in the camp that Lee, you worked in technology and tinkered with technology when you were.
I'm also going to say he's not 60 either.
No, not yet.
I love you, man.
That's no problem. Actually, I was actually thinking about that. That was part of mine. It's like, wait, That's not. Wait a minute. But then, like I said, I took the higher path and said, you know what? It's sometimes hard when the phone rings and it's a friend or a relative. It's like, what advice do you give them? And that's where I took this one. Is like, hey, this is a good starting point.
But the threats that the older generations, have maybe thought about or been involved with didn't necessarily involve computers, right? They involved telephones, perhaps. They involved physical security, perhaps. Larry, I'm listening to Code Girls, and I got to the part where they kind of like glossed over it briefly, but it was in obviously the 1940s, right? And
they discussed some stuff a little earlier, but it's mostly focused around the early 1940s.
And in early 1940s, someone went through, I believe it was Arlington Hall, where they were doing much of the code breaking, and like did a physical pen test essentially of Arlington Hall.
Yeah, it was like for a week.
Yeah, and like got badges and walked into places and stole sensitive documents, and these were the places where they were breaking the Japanese and German, largely they talk about Japanese codes being broken in Arlington Hall, and they had a physical pen test, and I'm like, wow, that was a thing back in the 40s, right? So that's the kind of security that, not that the 40s is the generation we're talking about, right? But necessarily, but the older generations are used to the internet and computers and browsers and passwords in that nature is still new, not stuff that they grew up with, in other words.
And admittedly, some of those folks were, maybe a little bit more technologically advanced, and even without the technology. So much of their work was done in their mind and or paper,
right?
To start, that like they got that things can go horribly wrong, and like it's an amazing story. I think much of it is going over our 8-year-old's head, and maybe even some of it over the 14-year-old's head. But I'm listening
some of
to
it over my head when they talk about how they break the codes. And Jeff Mann and I had this conversation that I want Jeff has not read the book yet. But I want Jeff to read the book, and I want to do a segment on it specifically on like exactly how they were breaking those codes. It's hard for me because we're listening to it.
The additives,
and it was like a checksum, right? The first 3 digits were the code, but the 4th digit was the sum of the first three.
First 3 and then added together. So like another additive, and the code groups, and the crib sheets.
That's another. Yes.
Which
all stuff, and when it's just funny to us, is kind of foreign.
It's foreign, but it's not.
Yes.
You think about
it's kind of like assault, but it's not really assault kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think it's more confusing if you've studied more of the modern cryptographic systems. I think you're even more confused, right?
Yeah.
It's a great book. Our listeners have heard both of us talk about it. I think it's a must read would you say it's a must read for folks in our field, Larry?
I would, and if nothing else, to understand the importance of a more diverse workforce, especially then.
Huge point. About diversity is addressed, but also diversity is a very important factor and really shines a light on that. But it also shines a light on we complained we couldn't get toilet paper in the pandemic. When you look at what was happening in World War II, like they couldn't get things like shampoo. In a whole bunch of items, and so we have nothing to complain about that. Maybe there was a little bit of a toilet paper shortage.
Yeah, like
give me a break.
You had to ration sugar,
food, meats, the whole thing.
Yep.
And we talk about food shortages today, but you can still go to the grocery store and get
there's stuff on the shelves,
right?
But it may not be what you want to eat.
Yes,
but it's something you can eat.
Well, watching TikTok and your Facebook.
Yeah,
shorts,
exactly, on your iPhone, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Your Story 13 or Mystery Snail or any of the APT ones this week are good.
I did not. I read some of these articles, but I didn't dig in. So my story number 7 was a USEF. I didn't cover that one. Was a USEF to free vulnerability in Excel, but there was another one. It was threat posts breakdown of the 4 0-day bugs in this patch Tuesday. The first of which they covered was the mystery snail in exploiting the Win32K bug. I read it, but I didn't prepare enough to be able to talk about it in detail. Therefore, I'm relying on my illustrious crew to fill in details.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. It's leveraging a kernel level driver that's often targeted, but this one's very interesting in how it's actually leveraging user API calls. It's a use after free in memory that allows you to jump from an unallocated spot in memory that calls unintended or unallocated user land or user functions that then allow you to jump back to the rest of kernel level. So there's a bunch of privilege escalation here that is hard to do in Windows, and the fact that they released 4 of them, this isn't just one, this is 4 that's part of an ongoing operation by Iron Husky, which is an APT group kind of out of China. They can attribute this because of other infrastructure that's been used in the past all the way back to 2012. This is actually the first time that some of this code and some of these rats have been, we'll say that have been publicly disclosed. Like they've been tracking this actor for a while. So some of this infrastructure's been known. Some of the code's been known, but they're just releasing this as kind of a public service on what's Iron Husky up to, what rat they're using, and some of the sophistication that they're building into their toolkit. So this is 4 0 days in an otherwise, I wouldn't call this a super sophisticated nation state one. They seem to jump from target to target, very politically charged, and that has some, infrastructure sharing has some implications. That means it's probably not one of their higher level, more sophisticated actors that is trying to maintain, long-term stealth. So there's some interesting things in this release, especially with 4 0 days at this level.
It's interesting.
And this is in Windows 10. Like, what does this affect?
Yeah.
Well, this affects everything. Windows 10. This one, I would assume this one, if you rewrote how the pointers were jumping, this would probably affect Windows 7 as well.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
They found it. I mean, it underscores how the use after free can kind of hide in there, right?
And it's
a very well documented bug. I mean, we can trace use after free. I mean, probably pretty far back, right? I mean, it's been in some of the more popular books that I started reading on software security, right? It's very well documented. The fact that it still exists in Windows just kind of, underscores the problem that we have with Windows in the number of lines of code and the number of opportunities there are to find vulnerabilities still to this day. I
think Tyler had some very interesting choice of words in describing some of this, and that it was a very interesting and a very complex path to follow with the Tyler, from what I'm sort of gathering with the multiple jumps, but used by a threat actor that is not particularly sophisticated.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, this has to be built into a toolkit, I would imagine, where they're reusing infrastructure and or IP space that's dating back to 2012. Like, even bad pen test companies have a little bit better OPSEC than that in some cases.
But the exploit and the vulnerability, was that just added back into this toolkit in that infrastructure? So they were like, oh, we have this infrastructure, but we bought this 0 day from someone who was really smart and found it, right?
That's probably my guess, is either they've bought that, or it's been included as part of an exploit kit where you're leveraging, say, something like a PHP code to do the injection, where you buy the exploit, and the exploit kit is separate from even the post-exploitation kit, which is also separate from the kernel rootkit driver that's usually installed next to your post-exploitation kit. That's typically how a good actor should work. So the fact that they got a couple 0 days in there, they've probably been dropping some coin on that. The Microsoft SharePoint, Microsoft Exchange pieces that were in here are much more interesting, where you have something like SharePoint, which everything on Teams is backed by SharePoint. Anytime you create a team in SharePoint, that's a backed website. Anytime you drop files in there or make a sub-channel with inside of a team, those are all different SharePoint websites. So this one seems a lot more interesting to me from a kind of dangerous standpoint, as well as the Exchange one. Anything that's still exposed from an Exchange standpoint also applies to some of the O365 And there's still a lot of on-prem exchange that companies have not given up, and that's usually exposed to the internet. So a few of these have a little bit bigger implication than I would say even that one.
The article says internal SharePoint servers. Is this exploit like valid on Azure as well? Like in O365?
So if you get creds, if you have access or authorization and you get creds and you land inside the network, or you're on a application that has application passwords or API access to something like SharePoint via, call it Teams, then that's obviously an exposed SharePoint. Like usually that requires credentials. When they say internal versus external, that just means that SharePoint isn't exposed to the internet. But if you have credentials, then via our magic SSO and SaaS and all of the other magic things that are now happening in that arena, now exposes that internal SharePoint to external just with a pair of creds. So I'm not sure what they're meaning exactly by that.
That's really interesting. And Microsoft is really, I mean, they're good with researchers for the most part, right?
Yeah.
And the fact that someone was like, "Hey, I've got some 0 days, and I'm gonna sell them." Yeah, I mean, it's not because Microsoft it's not because Microsoft's treating researchers badly that they're not going to disclose it to Microsoft. I mean, they're just maybe a nation state had a team that found it or whatever. Maybe they didn't, buy it off of research. I mean, they could have, right? But
well, anytime because Windows is so complex, you start to think about Active Directory, Azure, SharePoint, Teams, all the integrations between all those, single sign-on, Azure Sync, the connect back for Federation, ADFS, like all of these things that are tying together for Microsoft. Anytime you put a magnifying glass at a particular area you're looking at with inside of Microsoft or a Microsoft product, you almost always can find something to fall out. Now, it may not always be this, 7.8 or 8 point, whatever this is, where you're getting RC directly, but something like Privesk or the ability to do interesting things or look at something later with inside of a Windows application or Microsoft application, that almost always happens. So it's just people taking the time to look at it, maybe purchasing it, maybe not. Maybe they just have a team that's focused on
it. The other interesting thing to me here is that the security profile of your locally on-premise versus the hosted cloud versions of those, where you read these and it's like Microsoft or Oracle or whoever says, we got this in our cloud, we're taking care of it, but we've got it on-prem like Hybrid Exchange or other products, you're toast. And it's becoming some of this is like, why host this yourself anymore? I mean, yeah, you could still screw it up, but it seems like the bar is a little lower to get it right. And, stop insourcing everything, guys. Let's get the people who have the resources to keep on top of this shit and keep it patched.
It seems like, Lee, to your point, a few years ago, we were talking a lot about migrating your Microsoft infrastructure. I'll just use a blanket term and say Microsoft infrastructure, off to the cloud was like a big thing. We don't talk about that so much anymore. Is that because there's like we reached a tipping point where a certain percentage of large enterprises or even small to medium enterprises have migrated everything off or most things off into
or those that
Microsoft?
Are going to migrate have already?
Yeah. I
would say the migration is so hybrid right now that you have those that have migrated off, you have those that have migrated off and come back, and most of the corporations you found have migrated a portion of that off, come back and scaled where they're running a hybrid in a manner that makes a lot more sense. They've seen the cost, they've seen some of the, I would say, hardships and operational issues, and now they've kind of scaled to a point where, they probably have O365 and Teams hosted in Azure. They probably have some federation with accounts being synced back and forth in a hybrid, but they're still maintaining Active Directory and DNS internally, while having some of those functions kind of back and forth where it makes sense.
You're hitting what's manageable now. You can keep your arms around it. But you have to watch for what you're still insourcing. Those, sacred cows in the corner that really shouldn't be there anymore.
We all have those.
Oh, hell yeah.
We do, right? It's the elephant in the room. We all have those. and not just in Microsoft environments, right? We all have those.
Oh yeah,
those things. I saw there was a CISA alert.
you should pass the ice first.
On I'm going to pass the ice, which is water, which is very relevant to our story, Larry.
You're still not passing the hard water.
We need water and ice. I don't know what I did with it.
Here it is.
Oh, you have it. So the FBI,
He already passed it.
FBI, CISA, EPA, and NSA recommend water facilities, including DoD water treatment facilities in the United States and abroad, use a risk-informed analysis to determine the applicability of a range of technical and non-technical mitigations to prevent, detect, and respond to cyber threats, because they have basically observed, and you can read the CISA alert, they basically said, like, hackers be hacking, and they're targeting water systems. And they have this whole list that follows that statement that I just read of all these things you should do if you're a water treatment facility. And I'm like, well, that's good. I'm not going to downplay that's good, but like that's way easier said than done.
and arguably about 6 years too late. Like, didn't we have attacks on water treatment facilities like 6 years ago?
Yeah, at
Like,
least.
I mean, there was alerts after September 11th about poisoning the water system. Not so much cyber attacks, but more so
Physical.
I think they were warning about physical attacks back then.
But I know we've seen attacks against, and we've talked about them on the show within 6 years about, and you know, I have to say 6 years. It was probably 10, not really, but I'm finding that for me, when I say, oh man, that was just like yesterday, that yesterday was 5, 6, 7 years ago. Like, thank you, Facebook memories.
The elephant in the room here, I think, is, does it matter if these have been this bad for the last 6 years and you're an advanced nation state trying to maintain control over something that you may need to leverage in the future for kinetic damage? Would you not already be in those environments, and do the mitigations actually help boot an actor that's got that deep and had that much time with inside of an environment or network?
Yeah, I mean, you could boot, but are you really booting them all the way out? If they've got enough time, I mean, most of us know this, right?
Couple days, just a few hours.
I mean, to gain a foothold and maintain a foothold is not, I mean, all that difficult depending on the sophistication of the systems and their defenses. You know, okay, so now you're hyper aware, but you're really booting them out completely. How do you know?
Like, they should be doing these things. Like, don't get me wrong. Again, I think you're right. The guidance is well thought out and needs to be done. Like, this is something we've all been saying. Like, I don't see anything new here, but are we too late in critical infrastructure that we need to be doing this differently? Like, that's kind of the thought process, I think, in a few of the camps that have seen a lot of really nefarious things. So I don't know.
It's concerning that they've observed, and by they, FBI, CISA, Environmental Protection Agency, NSA, have collaborated together to say, we've observed both known and unknown threat actors in these systems. To me, that's kind of concerning. Say what you will about history, but for them to release this alert with that, you know, that even that level of details, like, very concerning.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I look at it and say, you know, we've had a lot of news in the last year or so about critical infrastructure under attack. And there's been a lot of advice, some just from CISA, a lot of collaborative advice, you know, getting a lot of agencies involved. A statement like that feels like look, guys, pay attention, take a look here. I guess I'm thinking they're trying to get the attention of the people that need to respond, because they can't just, you know, walk up one-on-one and grab them by the throat. But I look at those, I always say, you know, if you're in this, even if you're not doing water treatment. There's stuff you could use for your general cyber you may not have thought of. Take a look at these. They've got some good ideas. You don't have to adopt them all, but look for gaps. Here's a guide. I mean, you could throw the whole thing out if you want, but there might be something you missed.
There's likely something you missed. Not there might be. There is definitely something on your list. Yeah, there's definitely something you missed. Yeah, I come back to, maybe tooting my own horn a little bit. I can't remember how many years ago it was, but I was interviewed by CBS Sunday Morning about Dan Rather's new book. New book. It's been out 5 years. His book, Lights Out. Mm-hmm. About attacks against the nation's critical infrastructure and so forth. And some of the feedback that both I got and Dan Rather got about his book, like, this is a completely unrealistic scenario, this will never happen, our government and our critical infrastructure is so well protected. And I took the completely other stance 5-6 years ago when I was being interviewed. And I think if you go back and watch that episode, I will say, if you don't think that they're already in our systems, you're deluding yourself. Mm-hmm. And if you don't already think we're in theirs, you're also deluding yourself. I think it's a little bit of a two-way street here.
I think there's a standoff, that's happening. There's certainly a lot of speculation, some evidence, certainly, mostly speculation that we're all in each other's systems. Yeah, and it's a standoff. Shut off our water supply, and we'll shut off yours.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. It could be as simple as that. I mean, it's interesting how, similar to like IoT hacking and stuff, is that these systems are so disparate and so different and managed by different groups. And there's lots of different technology that it's not like there's one common denominator that could lead to like this catastrophic failure. It's frightening that some of the resilience is in the ubiquity of the systems.
Yeah, and I think also too is that I think so many folks that are implementing these systems, and I think there are a couple of the critical infrastructure groups that have gotten it. That my approach to the IoT,
I think Power is certainly hyper aware and has made huge strides.
And to the
Tyler, Larry, I mean, Lee, do you guys agree?
Agreed.
Power's made some strides.
Agreed. But again, I still think there are definite groups within the power industry and others that fail to recognize the gravity of the situation. I think the big thing that we included as part of the IoT course for SANS that we wrote was that the IOTA method that we've talked about in the past that never really got written, but this is as close as you're going to get, is that IoT and these connected systems are not a device. It's a part of something greater. You're going to have a system that connects to it, it controls it, reports data somewhere. You've got those systems that take that data and they populate other systems. And you've got maybe stuff on the back end that with multiple vendors and the cloud and your mobile app. This is all part of it. And I think there's so many points where these groups and these verticals forget that it's not just about these one or two devices. It's this whole ecosystem. So,
But I think that's been evolving over the past 20, 30 years, right?
Sure.
20, 30 years ago, we got to go protect the system. Now we have to protect the ecosystem. What's interesting is that Power has made some strides. Could that be one of the reasons why water is coming under scrutiny? We certainly talked about the Florida water attack and other attacks, and how when we dig in and we start peeling back the layers of the onion, that these water systems are not federally controlled. Some are, and some that support the federal government, but they're not necessarily state controlled. Maybe they're not county controlled. Maybe it's a private system, but it's like a mixed bag across it.
And there are still that in the power industry.
Yeah,
and arguably they had more focus. And I would argue, Paul, you and I have been on a very much a nostalgia kick on some of our reading material that ICS and the power industry were not the first. The phone company was.
Phone company was.
Yep. Yeah. The phone company was critical infrastructure.
Yeah.
So.
I see cellular companies being the next big power grid target. Like, you start taking down some of the cellular backup networks, some of the CDMA, LTE You look at our S7 communicator. Like that's an
so
very
it's
old
funny you
protocol.
say that, Tyler. Sorry to interrupt, but I did my story number 9 is an overview of SS7 signaling.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's a decent overview. Yeah, and some how SS7 works, and also some of the attacks against it. To your point of what if you were to target cellular and communications networks?
Did you guys? And I haven't been here in a couple weeks. Did you guys cover that story about the data breach for that provider and the SS7 stuff?
Yes, we did.
We did.
Yes.
Great.
That good Lord.
Yeah. Huh.
That's a good word for it.
Yeah.
Yep.
I agree, though that falls under critical infrastructure today.
It is now, yeah. Like you start, and you take that one step further, and you go into psyops. What does it take to actually manipulate a society in order to cause monetary harm and/or panic? You take away internet, and you start to mess with people's critical infrastructure and their ability to get to their money.
It's
Both those
interesting,
things
Tyler.
happen.
When we think about September 11th, one of the things that I think we don't often remember or maybe talk about was how the cellular and telecommunications infrastructure was impacted. There was like physical damage to some of that infrastructure based on the attacks, but also a like self-inflicted denial of service attack,
distributed
denial of service attack that like we couldn't call each other because everything was flooded in all at once.
Everybody calling everybody to check in.
Yes.
Yeah. Or
And then you have the ripple effect. You've got stock market starting to crash. You've got Bitcoin, people pulling money out of banks physically, and you end up coin shortage. You end up with food and supply chain attacks where it's just literally overwhelming the local economy that then overwhelms the distribution. So the ripple effect of even minor events and the ability to plan around those and correlate what that means from a critical infrastructure standpoint starts to get into some stuff that is a little bit terrifying as far as how fragile the system is, even based on just hearsay or rumor, not even things happening. You start to bring in kinetics and what happens around the psyops of the general public, of people that, again, have a 15-second attention span, and once they remove a few things or they have their friends tell them something from TikTok, like that's becoming a very, very bad situation at a scale that we can't even anticipate.
It's amazing how much security is about resiliency. And a lot of it comes down to the prepper. You were big in the prepping thing, right? Are today. But like prepping is about resiliency. Like it's about threat modeling. What is the worst case scenario?
And don't get me wrong.
How can I be resilient to the worst case scenario?
And don't get me wrong. I've gotten the threat model wrong more than once in any of those types of things.
Sure. Yeah.
And,
over or under prepping, right, is the thing.
Yep.
Right. I mean, you can kind of shoot yourself in the foot if you stockpile the wrong goods and fill up your own infrastructure with the wrong things, right? Or under prepare for some of the things that you didn't anticipate needing, like toilet paper or water.
Yep. Let's put it this way. It's no word of a lie that we're prepared for stuff and we have extra stuff on hand.
Sure.
And that whole issue with the pandemic and toilet paper, like, what issue with toilet paper? We've bought toilet paper since it's become a little bit more readily available, but it's just to maybe top stuff back off again.
Yeah.
And
I was accidentally prepped for that because we had an overabundance of it here in the office, right?
Yeah.
Like, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lee.
We're getting word to prep for another run on the paper products. Our local Costco's are already limiting purchases because they're afraid we're going to get another surge like that. And have you seen the pictures down at the harbor at Long Beach of all those container ships that are totally full?
That's an issue.
Can unload them?
Right.
Yep.
That's an issue as well. Also, here in Rhode Island, which county was it, Larry? I saw it on the news.
It's not hard.
There was, right. There was, was it Bristol or somewhere like that? There was a E. coli. They tested the water.
Yeah.
So speaking of water attacks, I wanted to relate
Bristol.
it. It was Bristol. There was E. coli in the water.
Yep.
And so they had to affect a water ban.
Yeah, water boil
Boil your water. but they were interviewing business owners who are already stressed from the pandemic as to how they're making food and soup and all that stuff with the water ban in effect and how it's impacting it. So water definitely plays into critical infrastructure. I mean, we can go to the store and buy bottled water, but that's a limited kind of thing, right? Boiling water slows down that. You start coupling that with other attacks against other pieces of critical infrastructure, like power, like the supply chain. Lee, you mentioned the container ships, right? It could mean a really bad day if we're not resilient enough in planning for those kind of attacks.
Lee, I saw something on the news this morning, and we're getting way off reservation here, but way off the rabbit trail, as it were. But I saw something on the news saying that it could take up to 6 months for them to clear the backlog of container ships working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It is going into next year, like almost summertime of next year, for them to clear the backlog of those container ships.
I fully believe that it's at least a year from today, maybe a little more, maybe 2020. I'm hearing 2023 before the supply chain starts to return. Back to airports kind of normal, right?
My suggestion is be prepared for next year to have an influx of Squid Game costumes for Halloween, because that's when they'll arrive.
Yes.
They'll finally get here by then. So
is that the Korean TV show you guys were talking about? We started watching that.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
Don't spoil
the
it for
reason
me.
I'm thinking about this is my story about how Apple is finally getting backlogs because of the chip supply. They had done a lot of prepping and laying in ahead of supplies, setting an alternate supply routes. But even them, their prep had a limited window where they could do it. And now we're all kind of in this. We can't get the supplies, whether it's toilet papers or chips for graphic card or whatever. It's really frustrating, and surviving another year is going to be really hard.
To case in point, we'll tie that back to some more security stuff too. The one that the project that I'm waiting for was a Kickstarter project. It's not the Dolphin. It's the all-in-one RFID, I2C button hacking device, and the name is freaking escaping. The Flipper. The Flipper. They've had pretty massive supply chain issues in getting it completed, to the point that at the last moment they had to swap out one of the chips because even despite all of the promises and the contractual obligations from the factories in China to deliver a specific number of chips, they couldn't get them, and the factories said sorry.
But it's weird, how random it is, and it's how do you prepare for randomness like that? I ordered. We were talking about the Drobo recovery that I'm doing. The USB bus pirate, I could order from Amazon and was here the next day or the day after. Totally fine. Go try and find an RTX graphics card. You could find it, but you're going to pay 3 times, likely 2 to 3 times more than what it's valued at by the manufacturer in the MSRP.
But it's also a different market too. Is that how many people have built computers to build or to do that for gaming for millions, and how many people need a bus pirate?
Right. Yeah, supply and demand plays in.
Yep.
You're right.
Absolutely.
So speaking, just one last story that I wanted to hit, because many of us have worked for universities and or have supported the school systems, right? The Biden administration has actually signed into law, which is amazing. This became law. So if you remember your middle school or 6th grade or earlier history class, how laws are passed in the U.S., this is a law. And whether you agree with it or not, it's pretty amazing. This is a law on a school cybersecurity act, has been signed into law, that CISA will create guidelines and disclosure for the school systems. So and what's interesting is it doesn't give resources to school systems, which I find is the missing piece here. But it's a law that requires CISA to provide guidance to school systems. John Bambanek, many of us know John, So John says, while studying the risks and creating free resources and guides is a good first step, the reality is that smaller and poorer districts won't be able to implement much of what's in the guide CISA will create, assuming they have any staff that can read and understand it in the first place. And I agree with John wholeheartedly. And I don't think that's, to me, I'm going to extend what John said and said that's not just smaller or poorer districts. That's most districts, in my opinion, in the United States that will read the guidance provided by CISA, much like the water systems we just talked about, and go, yeah, that's great, but like I don't have the resources to implement any of this stuff to be, and they're not necessarily compliant with the law. Like the law is that CISA has to report guidance and give guidance to schools, which was kind of misguided, in my opinion. As you know, Larry and I worked very much in Rhode Island with many of the school, universities and colleges, but
or
also
associated organizations.
But also, there was also the K through 12 school system was supported by RINET, right?
Yep,
was one of the resources there. They're very resource constrained, and not just in Rhode Island, but in most of the states in the U.S. They're all resource constrained. Yeah. They all have Chromebooks and IT support staff, but they're all resource constrained. So great, like you should tell them, like, hey, you should implement, something like the Security Onion or OSquery, which we talked about on the show. Like, but who's going to do that? And who's going to pay for all of that? Like, there was no funding. There was no teeth to this, which was
typical.
Concerning.
Typical.
Yep.
With that,
thank you, everyone, for listening and watching this edition of Paul's Security Weekly. Larry, take us out.
Over and out.